Chapter 120. When he walked out of the Mansion of Light, he intended to go directly back to the inn, but he saw Wang Lu and Yu Xinyao waiting side by side in the shadow of a corner. Wen Bao hurriedly sent away his two assistants and quickly stepped forward. Wang Lu looked at the remaining blank expression on Wen Bao's face and said with a playful smile, "Fatty, sure enough, when winter comes, spring is not far away." Pfft, Yu Xinyao covered her mouth and chuckled. Wen Bao bowed his head in embarrassment. When he saw the smile on Yu Xinyao's face, his heart felt sour. How is the negotiation going? Speaking of business, Wen Bao also restrained some of the thoughts in his heart and seriously repeated the process. Wang Lu patted the fatty's shoulder. "Good, you really didn't disappoint." Wen Bao shook his head in frustration. "It's all based on the foundation laid by senior brother. The other party actually wanted to cooperate, I just pushed the boat along with the current, there's nothing worth mentioning. Pushing the boat along with the current is also a skill, at least the other party is willing to let you push, this is not easy." After being in contact with Wang Lu for a long time, Wen Bao could hear the ridicule in the other party's words. He couldn't help but be embarrassed. Senior brother is joking, there's no such thing. It doesn't matter, sooner or later there will be. Since she has made an appointment to continue the negotiation tomorrow, you should prepare well tonight and work hard tomorrow to make the favorable impression on her go up another level. Wen Bao was surprised. "Senior brother, are you going to wash your hands of this? Otherwise, do you want to die?" Wang Lu spread out his hands. "Since you talked well with the other party today, you should continue to work hard. Casually changing people in the negotiation process is like changing the profession of a writer, facing great risks. This is not the same as what we agreed at the beginning." Wang Lu patted Wen Bao's shoulder. "Then keep up with the times." Seeing that Wen Bao was still uneasy, Wang Lu at least seriously explained, "At this stage, you are the best candidate to negotiate with that Qian Hu, because no matter what the result is, there will be room for mediation. You still have me behind you, and Li Nana still has the great Ming country's imperial court. Secondly, Li Nana and I both have the temperament to attack. When two attacks meet, there will definitely be a setback. However, we are here to negotiate, not to fight or to be turned gay. So, at this time, we need a fatty like you to come forward and ease the atmosphere. Look at you, you did very well today." Wen Bao didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "We almost lost our sovereignty and humiliated our country. The first time is just a little shaky. In the future, when you get used to it, the thrill will gradually come. Moreover, even if you lose your country's sovereignty, you still have me, the cult master, to back you up. What are you afraid of? The last and most important reason is that Qian Hu likes you a lot. You have to make good use of your favorability." Wen Bao said helplessly, "Senior brother, which eye of yours saw that she likes me? Otherwise, why do you think you haven't lost your sovereignty and humiliated your country?" Wen Bao was taken aback. No matter how Wen Bao argued, in the end, he couldn't shirk this task. Wang Lu mercilessly put the heavy responsibility of negotiation on Wen Bao's shoulders, and then disappeared without a trace. Yu Xinyao, without a doubt, followed Wang Lu. Therefore, Wen Bao had to fight alone with loneliness and sorrow. However, in the next 2 days, the negotiation with Li Nana was not as difficult as he imagined. Li Nana's character was indeed strong. During the negotiation, she interfered countless times, making Wen Bao break out in cold sweat. He was extremely embarrassed, but every crisis was more frightening than dangerous. Li Nana gave Wen Bao enough room to maneuver, so that he wouldn't be too embarrassed. Perhaps it was because her willingness to cooperate was very strong, or perhaps it was because she really had a perverted aesthetic that she would like a fat teenager like Wen Bao. However, Wen Bao simply had no time to think about these trivial details. Representing the wisdom sect to negotiate with the Mansion of Light took up all of his energy. There were too many problems that needed to be solved, and the conflicts of interest that needed to be disputed were innumerable. So much so that in these 2 days, Wen Bao and Li Nana did not rest for even a moment. They talked all night long, until he, a 7th-level chi cultivating stage cultivator, who had reached the body forging stage, had a dry mouth and blisters. 2 days later, the final result of the negotiation was revealed, which was quite gratifying. The Mansion of Light had so far obtained the most powerful support at the grassroots level. The Wisdom Sect's powerful network of more than 1 million followers would be used by them. As the person in charge of the Mansion of Light, Li Nana enjoyed the same authority as the Wisdom Sect's vice sect leader. First of all, she could freely read the sect's information. Except for a few parts that were classified as top secret by Wang Lu, the rest were completely open to her. For Li Nana, the value of this alone was immeasurable. Not to mention the vice sect leader's authority was far more than this. As long as she wanted, she could order the followers to carry out large-scale construction, or collect resources. Of course, the Wisdom Sect's harvest was not small. The most important point was that the Mansion of Light was willing to provide the Wisdom Sect with the Great Ming country's official qualification certification. Using the authority of a vice sect leader in exchange for the Great Ming country's official recognition seemed to be a big loss, but in fact, for the current Wisdom Sect, the official certification was the most important part. With it, the Wisdom Sect could boldly develop from the countryside to the prefectural city. In fact, until the two sides reached the cooperation agreement, the Wisdom Sect was an out-and-out cult. Developing in the Great Ming country's territory, but without the Great Ming country's approval, and without the registration of the Wanxian League, if this wasn't a cult, then what was? It was actually jackals of the same tribe as the Seven Stars sect. However, now that they had the Mansion of Light's approval, the Wisdom Sect had transformed into a legal sect, impressively whitewashed. Even if they wanted to develop followers in the prefectural city or even the capital, they could still confidently do so. And for the current Wisdom Sect, this could be said to be crucial. Although the number of followers was more than 1 million, and the momentum of development was still rapid, the bottleneck of the Wisdom Sect was actually not far away. Almost all of the remote villages in the Great Ming country had been covered by the Wisdom Sect, and some of the smaller counties had already fallen into the enemy's hands. In the eyes of many sects, these areas were not worth paying attention to. As for those rich counties and even prefectural cities, the Wisdom Sect still didn't have the qualification to touch them. If they didn't touch them, that would be fine, but if they did, it would be troublesome. As for developing in other countries, it was even more unreliable. Not everyone could be like the Great Ming country, who turned a blind eye to the immortal cultivation sect. The tangled attitude of the Great Ming country's imperial court toward the cultivators was actually a good soil for the rapid development of the Wisdom Sect. Now that they had the permission from the Mansion of Light, the Wisdom Sect's only bottleneck was no longer there. In the future, the explosive development could also be foreseen. Therefore, after negotiating the cooperation, Wen Bao was extremely excited. That same night, he and his two assistants drank until they were dead drunk. With his cultivation, the mortal world's fine wine was almost useless to him. The dead fatty, on the other hand, drank several hundred spirit stones in one night, extremely extravagant. Early the next morning, Wen Bao felt a splitting headache. If a small amount of wine that was full of spiritual energy was drunk, not only could it make people relaxed and happy, it could also increase their cultivation level. However, excessive drinking would injure one's primordial spirit. Wen Bao now felt that his primordial spirit, which was initially condensed, showed signs of dispersing. Perhaps it would be difficult to recover without 3 to 5 days of recuperation. However, the 2 days and nights of negotiations were tiring, and even Xian Hu, who was in the foundation establishment stage, was physically and mentally exhausted. Since they had agreed to discuss the next step of the cooperation in 3 days, they still had enough time to rest. Coming out of the guest room, Wen Bao let out a long yawn and was ready to take a stroll around the city. First, he had nothing to do, and second, he wanted to investigate. In the future, the Wisdom Sect would inevitably set up a branch in the Great Ming country's capital. As the head of the infrastructure department, he would inevitably be busy, so it was not a bad thing to prepare in advance. However, before he could walk out of the inn's door, Wen Bao's heart suddenly jumped. His primordial spirit in his inner mansion trembled, as if a great horror was about to befall him. The next moment, a majestic voice sounded in his primordial spirit. Wen Bao. This voice was too familiar. In many nightmares, this voice was always the protagonist. Wen Bao immediately felt his chest tighten. Third Martial Uncle. Chapter 121. Wen Bao was an inner disciple of Lingjian School and was under the tutelage of the second elder of Misty Peak, Lu Xian. His third martial uncle was naturally the third elder of the sect, disciplinary elder Fang He. In Wang Lu's words, it was Senior Officer Ji. Lu Xian was an out-and-out strict teacher. During his 2 years of training in the Mountain Gate, Wen Bao had been scolded many times. But compared to Lu Xian's scolding, the disciplinary elder's scolding was undoubtedly much more frightening. At this time, hearing Fang He's voice, Wen Bao trembled like a sieve. Return to your guest room. Your master and I are both there. Wen Bao wanted to escape 1,000 times, but in the end, he returned to the guest room, trembling. When he opened the door, his vision went dark. Not only master and third martial uncle, but even fifth martial uncle was also present. However, compared to Lu Xian and Fang He, who were sitting upright and still with a serious and angry look on their faces, Wang Wu's posture was much more relaxed. As soon as he saw her, he greeted her with a smile. This autumn fat is quite generous. It was early winter, and the season to put on autumn fat had already passed a few months ago. Moreover, he had been working hard as the head of the infrastructure department for the past few months, and he had almost lost a lot of weight. At this time, hearing fifth martial uncle's teasing, Wen Bao forced out a smile. Fifth junior sister, don't talk about irrelevant topics. Fang He coldly interrupted, and then looked at Wen Bao sternly. Do you know why your master and I are here? Wen Bao stared blankly for a moment, then nodded helplessly. The elder had come personally. Was he still afraid that he would quibble? Confess and be lenient. Thereupon, he told the whole story of how he joined the Wisdom sect. From capturing the dirty old man in the Marquis County to talking with Qian Hu through the night 2 days ago, he almost told her everything. Except for the sensitive heaven-burning blood technique, he didn't hold back anything else. This was one of Wen Bao Shui's cleverness. If it was a cultivator of the younger generation who came down from the mountain, he might have to try and deal with him. However, in front of a strict and upright elder, any little tricks would be suicidal. Since they were willing to listen to him, it meant that there was still a chance for things to turn around. Sure enough, after listening to Wen Bao's words, Lu Xian and Fang He did not immediately fly into a rage. They just silently nodded, but their complexions became even more gloomy. Only the fifth elder was still carefree. Little fatty, you're really good. You're actually a dignified divisional cadre now. Sure enough, the cadre of a large organization is promoted quickly. As soon as she finished speaking, Lu Xian finally couldn't hold back his anger. Fifth junior sister, you're still talking nonsense. You also understood what Wen Bao said just now. Zhu Qin's report was not false. Your precious disciple has indeed caused a huge disaster. The fifth elder blinked. Really? Still playing dumb. What's going on with that damn Wisdom sect? The fifth elder continued to blink. I think this is a typical entrepreneurial behavior. The workers mainly rely on their own capital, resources, information, technology, experience, and other factors to establish their own industries and solve the employment problem. By establishing the Wisdom sect, Wang Lu has successfully set off a wave of immortal cultivation in the Great Ming country, solving the employment problem of millions of people. I think the sect should commend and encourage him, and also give me, his master, 2 levels of subsidy. Before he finished, Lu Xian was so angry that he slammed the table without a care for his image. Bullsh *T. The fifth elder was surprised. Here. That's not good. Buzz. Elder Lu Xian's sword chi suddenly bloomed. It looked like he was about to start practicing. Fang He sighed and stretched out his hand to stop Lu Xian. Senior brother, please calm down. Our main task is not to blame fifth junior sister, but to find the person involved. Then he turned around and asked Wen Bao, "Do you have a way to contact your senior brother Wang Lu?" Wen Bao replied, "I used to, but I just used the psychic jade 2 days ago, so now I can't contact him." Lu Xian thought for a moment. "Do you know where he went?" Wen Bao thought for a moment, shook his head, and said, "I really don't know." "What about him?" "Junior sister Yu followed him." Yu Xiniao. Fang He's brows deeply wrinkled. That child has always been steady, how could she be together with Wang Lu? Lu Xian coldly snorted. She was incited. Yu Xiniao, that child, after all, doesn't have much experience, and Wang Lu's mouth is even better than his master's. The fifth elder sneered. "Better than my master? Second senior brother, you look down on me too much." Lu Xian ignored her. "Since we know he's with Yu Xiniao, then let junior sister Huayun find him." Then he pointed his finger forward, and a circle of ripples appeared in the space. In the middle of the ripples, Huayun's face gradually emerged. "Hey, senior brother, you're looking for me?" Huayun looked surprised. "Help me find Yu Xiniao." Lu Xian made a long story short, and Huayun didn't ask why. After nodding, she closed her eyes and opened them, and then she got the answer. "She's not far from you. You should know after using your primordial spirit to scan." After that, her small face showed a bit of curiosity. "Are you playing a human game?" Of course, Lu Xian was not in the mood to play any game. After hearing Huayun's answer, his face was startled. He immediately used his primordial spirit to scan, and sure enough, he found Yu Xiniao's unique magical power fluctuation. Of course, beside Yu Xiniao, he also caught a faint but unusually clear magical power fluctuation. It was Wang Lu. With the strength of Lu Xian's primordial spirit, if he really used his full strength to scan, the entire Great Ming country wouldn't be able to escape from his divine sense. However, if he rashly used his primordial spirit to scan in a foreign country, it would be quite disrespectful to the local cultivators, and might even affect some people's cultivation. Therefore, unless the situation was urgent, Lu Xian would not use too much of his primordial spirit. Therefore, when he was looking for someone, he could only ask the sect elders who were connected to the primordial spirit of the disciples. Of course, the fifth elder also came for this reason. Unfortunately, the fifth elder did not cooperate at all. Fortunately, in the end, she was found, and it was Wang Lu who delivered himself to the door. Not long after, Wang Lu entered the room, and Yu Xiniao, who was next to him, very obediently stood to the side. She was just a spectator of what happened next. Seeing Wang Lu, Fang He suddenly couldn't sit still. He stood up and said, "Wang Lu, do you know your mistake?" Wang Lu was inexplicably stunned for a long time, then he bowed his head and said, "Disciple's mistake is that I am too outstanding, making the other junior brothers and sisters look dim and dull, making them lose the motivation to continue to move forward on the road of immortal cultivation." Hearing this, Fang He almost slashed his sword to kill this rebellious disciple. "Fifth junior sister, look, this is the good disciple you have taught." Fifth junior sister nodded her head in relief. "Not bad, neither servile nor overbearing, he has my style." Not servile nor overbearing, Fang He's hair stood up in anger, his primordial spirit was agitated, he was almost angered to death by this fellow. However, seeing that the fifth junior sister had made up her mind to cover up for Wang Lu, there was nothing more to say to her. "Fifth junior sister, you can leave now." "Hey, so early? You haven't eaten lunch yet. Get lost." The fifth junior sister had to resentfully leave, leaving only the 2 elders and 3 disciples in the room. Disciplinary elder Fang He looked at Wang Lu up and down, and he couldn't help but sigh. "You are an extremely intelligent child, why did you do such a thing?" Wang Lu earnestly asked, "May I ask uncle, what did I do wrong?" Fang He was silent for a moment. After he was sure that Wang Lu didn't want to continue his jesting, he was actually questioning him. He couldn't help but be somewhat annoyed. "You established a cult in the mortal world, yet you ask me what did I do wrong?" Wang Lu firmly retorted, Wisdom's sect is not a cult, uncle, please examine it clearly. Fang He slapped the table. Absurd. Everything you did in the Great Ming country, Zhu Qin has written a report and sent it back to the sect. Now, I'll let you see if there is anything wrong with it. A letter appeared out of thin air in Wang Lu's hand. Wang Lu, as expected, pinched it and shook it toward Yu Xinyao. The young girl bowed her head and smiled, thinking that her senior brother's prediction was indeed correct. Zhu Qin's report was meticulous. It described the development process of the Wisdom sect in the past 8 months. There was no embellishment, nor was there any baseless framing. This kind of boring trick would only reduce his position in the elders' hearts. Moreover, why would Wang Lu's actions need to be embellished? After reading the report, Wang Lu asked, when the sect arranged this experiential learning, did it prohibit the disciples from establishing their own sect? Although my cultivation is shallow, establishing a sect is not prohibited by the sect's rules. Fang He frowned and was about to speak, but Lu Xian, who personally planned this experiential learning, could not help but angrily said, the sect arranged this experiential learning in order to let you increase your experience and enhance your cultivation, not to mislead people with lies and exorbitant taxes. You're just a qi cultivating stage cultivator, far from being anxious to accumulate wealth. I really didn't expect that the usually opinionated person like you would actually be dazzled by the world of mortals. Is the non-phase peak really that poor? Wang Lu chuckled. Rest assured, uncle, although the non-phase peak is poor, disciples' ambition has never been poor. The purpose of this experiential learning has never been forgotten. Although the profit of my wisdom sect is good, disciple has never taken a penny from it. Thus, disciple is not trying to amass wealth by establishing a sect. Uncle, please examine this matter clearly. Upon hearing Wang Lu's words, Lu Xian snorted. Even if it's not for wealth, it's still the same for power. Wang Lu didn't deny this point. Although in the Lingjian school, he was a successor disciple, and his status was relatively aloof, but compared to the wisdom sect leader, whose words could move millions of people, they couldn't be mentioned in the same breath. The chaotic world of mortals is the best place to temper people's heart. The reason I sent you down the mountain is to let you be untainted by the mud, not to let you sink into the world of mortals. However, before the elder could finish his lecture, Wang Lu rudely interrupted him. Disciple has never indulged in power and wealth. In these 8 months, disciple has been cultivating non-stop, and my cultivation has made great progress. With that, he took the initiative to release the magical power fluctuation of a level 6 Qi cultivating stage cultivator. Although in front of a Yuanying stage cultivator, it was like a drop in the ocean, compared to the other 2 disciples in the room, this cultivation speed was already excellent. However, upon seeing this, Lu Xian snorted. Wang Lu, don't forget your identity. You're not an ordinary inner court disciple, you're the sect's successor disciple. You're already complacent with just a level 6 Qi cultivating stage. Do you know, even if you're not compared to the other successor disciples, even among the disciples who entered the sect at the same time as you, your cultivation is not the highest. Wang Lu was neither servile nor overbearing. If I remember correctly, it's uncle who taught the disciples not to blindly believe in the cultivation stage. Although disciples' cultivation stage is not high, disciples' strength is valiant, absolutely not comparable to those junior brothers and sisters who relied on fortuitous encounters to increase their cultivation stage. Uncle, please examine this clearly. This high-sounding and shameless speech made Lu Xian speechless for a whole incense stick worth of time. Although before he went down the mountain, he already knew that this child Wang Lu had been tormented by his master, at this time, he found out that he still underestimated his stubbornness. Not to mention anything else, just his attitude toward his uncle was already irritating. Especially the nearby disciplinary elder, Fang He, who was glaring at him. In his mind, he quickly calculated how many sect rules Wang Lu had violated. You've been a sect leader in the mortal world for too long. Your ego has inflated to the point that you've lost your mind. Wang Lu laughed. Whether or not I'm losing my mind and boasting, in fact, uncle only needs to test me. Disciple is bold enough to ask uncle to bestow me with a sword. As soon as he said this, the entire room was shocked. Chapter 122. What sword do you want me to give you? Lu Xian's face was solemn as he asked in a deep voice. Wang Lu replied, the sword of truth. Lu Xian slightly frowned, his stern eyes examined Wang Lu for a long time, and finally nodded slowly. You want to prove your innocence? Well, I agree. Lu Xian had just nodded when Fang He hesitated. Senior brother, this is against the rules. Lu Xian snorted, I know. A Qi cultivating stage disciple running to a Yuanying stage elder to ask for the sword of truth is indeed shocking, but since it is his request, the sect's rules do not stipulate that it cannot be done. But the sword of truth requires the use of the misty immortal heart, even if it is only a little bit. It is not something that a Qi cultivating stage cultivator can bear. The so-called sword of truth was a rule that many sects had. When a person could not defend himself, he could ask the elders of the sect to give him the sword of truth. The elder would use the immortal heart to control the sword, and the sword would ask the heart. If the disciple could block the elder's sword, then he would not be able to prove himself. Of course, this sword was so powerful that it was not easy to block. The fierceness of the sword of truth did not lie in how strong the strength of the sword user was or how sharp the sword intent was, but the power of the immortal heart contained in the sword could directly interrogate the primordial spirit. Ask if you have a guilty conscience in your heart. If you do, this sword will directly penetrate your heart, break your primordial spirit, and make you collapse without a fight. If you have a clear conscience, even if the sword of truth changed the color of heaven and earth, and the mountains collapsed, it would only be a breeze. But it was easier said than done for a person to have a clear conscience. Even if it was an innocent person, every little thing in life could make them feel guilty, such as being a little lazy during cultivation, or talking about someone behind their back with other disciples. Even if it had nothing to do with the question, the guilt in their heart would not be able to hide from the sword of truth and would become a huge flaw. Of course, the sword of truth would also leave some leeway, so that the disciple could use their own cultivation level and sword techniques to offset some of the power, so that even if there was a little guilt in their heart, they could barely withstand it. Therefore, even though the sword of truth was not 100% accurate, it was still able to avoid a lot of grievances. Therefore, many sects kept the sword of truth. It's just that if you search the entire Wanxian League, you might not be able to find a few Qi cultivating stage cultivators who would dare to ask for the sword of truth. Because to a Qi condensation cultivator, those methods that could counteract the power simply couldn't be used. Cultivating Qi mainly cultivated the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, and cultivated one's own magical power. The cultivation of primordial spirit was mainly done after the foundation establishment stage. Of course, it didn't mean that Qi cultivating cultivators didn't need to focus on their primordial spirit. However, even if Yu Xinyao was able to advance her primordial spirit very quickly, in actual combat, unless it was coordinated with a formation, it wouldn't have much effect. Of course, Yu Xinyao didn't pursue actual combat ability. Her cultivation plan was tailor-made for herself, it had its own purpose. In Fang He's view, Wang Lu, a middle-level Qi cultivating stage cultivator, asking for the sword of truth, was simply asking for trouble. Fang He asked, do you think your non-phase method's defensive power is strong enough to withstand the sword of truth? Wang Lu replied, disciple doesn't dare to be so arrogant. Therefore, martial uncle, please set this sword for 3 days later. 3 days later? Correct. Disciple needs 3 days to prepare before I can receive this sword. Lu Xian sneered. You want to play tricks to delay the time? Wang Lu said, I don't dare. Disciple will arrange everything in the Wisdom Sect's headquarter, martial uncle can rest assured. Wisdom Sect's headquarter, Wang Family Village. Very well, I'm leaving. Half of Lu Xian's heart was impatient, and the other half was curious. The calmness that Wang Lu showed right now was not fake. In his life, Lu Xian had seen countless people. How could he not see whether Wang Lu was really confident or just bluffing? However, with his Qi cultivating stage cultivation base, how could he receive his sword of truth? With his immature sect, which was established by mortals and 6 harmonies cultivators, what kind of powerful arrangement could he have? 3 days? Let alone 3 days, even if he was given 3 years, unless he could cultivate his jade mansion and advance from chi cultivating stage to foundation establishment stage. Otherwise, no matter how he arranged, the sword of truth would be like a natural moat. In fact, for the vast majority of cultivators in the immortal cultivation world, even if they were in the Shudan stage, the sword of truth was still difficult to solve, even if they were really innocent. Wang Lu, with his chi cultivating stage cultivation base, vainly attempted to reach the Shudan stage. Did he think he had the brilliant sword heart? With a sneer, Lu Xian picked up Wang Lu with one hand and turned into a golden sword light, flying straight toward the Wang family village. Fang He shook his head, turned into a sword light, and followed his senior brother. As for Wen Bao and Yu Xinyao, who were left in the room, they looked at each other in dismay, not knowing what to do. The fat man didn't even care about his worries in front of junior sister Yu. He just asked, "Junior sister, what did senior brother do these past few days?" Yu Xinyao said with a smile, "You're asking the wrong person. In those 2 days, I didn't follow senior brother. After leaving the city, I followed his people to run around, signed a lot of documents, and met a lot of people. But as for the specific things, to be honest, I'm still confused. As for senior brother himself, there's no need to say anything." So mysterious? Wen Bao was taken aback. It seemed like his senior brother had seriously arranged everything. However, in the face of the menacing second elder and third elder, even if he arranged a lot, could he really come back from the dead? Instead of asking me, it's better to ask the fifth elder. She should know more about Wang Lu than anyone else. When Wen Bao went to the first floor of the inn and found the fifth elder who was drinking and eating meat, the woman just smiled. "Rest assured, nothing will happen." Listening to the fifth elder, Wen Bao suddenly breathed a sigh of relief. But then, even if Wang Lu is captured by old man Fang and put in confinement for 10,000 years, as long as I claim that I have no knowledge of this matter, it won't implicate me. Wen Bao was surprised. "Fifth martial ant, you said nothing will happen. Don't tell me, of course, nothing will happen to me. What does Wang Lu's life or death have to do with me? He started his own business in the Great Ming country and earned a lot of money, but he never sent me a single spirit stone. Using the body and sword unity technique of a Yuanying stage cultivator, he only spent the time it took to burn a stick of incense to fly from the capital of the Great Ming country to the remote Wang family village of the Dog Ear Mountain. However, when he flew over the Wang family village, Lu Xian couldn't help but be startled. What entered his field of vision was not a barren mountain village that could be seen everywhere, nor was it a symbol of the evil sect's extravagant palace. With the Wang family village as the center, there were several hundred miles of spiritual fields. In the fields grew all kinds of spiritual grasses and elixirs. Although the grade was not high, it was obvious that they had been carefully taken care of, and their growth was gratifying. What was even rarer was that, although the spiritual energy here was not particularly rich, it was extremely well utilized. Almost every bit of it was not wasted, it was evenly and methodically distributed all over the mountain. And in the middle of the Wang family village, there was a strange altar, which was like a heart that triggered the spiritual energy tide, providing the entire village and the surrounding spiritual fields with an endless supply of spiritual energy. Not bad. After looking at it from the air for a while, even though Lu Xian disapproved of Wang Lu's waste of energy to run the evil sect, he had to admit that the management of this evil sect's headquarters was really good. Although it couldn't be compared to the big sects, it was not much worse than those rank 9 sections. Wang Lu smiled and explained, although the Wang family village is the birthplace of the wisdom sect, its condition is not particularly good, therefore, the scale of its development is limited. However, after my adjustment, the geomancy of this place has changed. In less than 50 years, the spiritual energy along the feng shui line will be more and more abundant, and this place will become a real paradise. After looking at it for a while, Lu Xian nodded in agreement with Wang Lu's statement. The spiritual energy in the 9 regions was not constant, the total amount was conserved, and the spiritual energy along the feng shui line was also the same. It's not that if you have more, I have less, and if you have less, I have more. As long as it was properly managed, the spiritual energy environment of a place could be improved, from an ordinary place to a place with good geomancy. The Xingjing sect in the central region, where the Xingjing sect was located, thousands of years ago, was just a plain that could be seen everywhere in the 9 regions. Of course, in this world, there were no ideals to speak of. Most of the time, even the cultivators who were supposed to be detached were more accustomed to plundering. In any case, the 9 regions was so big that even if they plunder for a lifetime, they would never be able to exhaust it. Therefore, in Lu Xian's view, the wisdom sect was obviously just a cult, and Wang Lu's experiential learning time was obviously only 1 year, yet he was willing to make this kind of long-term plan. It was really hard to believe that he was really doing this for power or money. Thinking to this, Lu Xian asked, "You want me to come here to show off your achievement?" Having said that, he continued to look at the Wang family village. There was quite a bit of admiration in his eyes. Wang Lu said with a smile, "In addition to the altar in the middle of the village, there's really nothing worth showing off in the Wang family village. There are at least a dozen of such villages in the wisdom sect. This place, after all, has poor innate conditions, so the layout is limited." Lu Xian snorted and didn't let Wang Lu continue to show off. "Just focus on your arrangement, I'll give you 3 days. Third junior brother and I will watch over here. You can arrange whatever you want, as long as you don't leave the radius of 50 kilometers. Wang Lu didn't say much. Soon, he found the wisdom sect's higher-ups in the village and quickly began his own arrangement. Just like what Lu Xian thought, with his qi cultivating stage, even if it was the combination of non-phase method and void spirit root, in theory, it was just a fantasy. Thus, the key to going against the heaven was naturally the arrangement in these 3 days. Wang Lu's arrangement was extraordinary. For the Wang family village, it was simply a big move that could change the heaven and earth. If Wang Lu hadn't notified the wisdom sect's higher-ups in advance a few days ago and made the corresponding manpower and material arrangement, it would be too late for Wang Lu's plan to be realized. However, even so, with the wisdom sect's current strength, it was still quite difficult to meet Wang Lu's requirements. The higher-ups of the sect were urgently summoned to the village a day ago and began to work frantically to prepare for the early stage. When Wang Lu personally arrived and announced the plan, those vice-sect leaders and elders who were accustomed to the rapid development of the wisdom sect and the construction of miracles simply stared their eyes out. Yi Chuchen, who could be called Wang Lu's most capable assistant, softly whispered, "Sect leader, the amount of work is too huge. Let's not talk about the technical difficulties, just the investment of resources. He, brother Yi, do you want to admit that you're incompetent and can't complete the sect leader's task?" At this time, the one who spoke was another vice-sect leader of the wisdom sect, Daoist Ming Yun. This Daoist was quite a famous loose cultivator in the immortal cultivation world of the Blue River region. His cultivation base was low-level shoot-on stage, and his character was somewhat crazy. His conduct was neither good nor evil, which gave many people a headache. 5 months ago, Daoist Ming Yun came uninvited. At that time, Yi Chuchen thought that he came to challenge the sect and was taken aback. However, he found out that this person actually came because of the sect's reputation and applied to join the sect. Thus, he was even more surprised. As for whose name he admired? Nonsense, of course it was the name of the sect leader, Wang Lu. Wang Lu didn't know what kind of demonic method this Daoist Ming Yun cultivated, which caused his primordial spirit to distort. Obviously, he was a shoot-on stage expert, yet he admired Wang Lu, a mere qi-cultivating stage cultivator. Soon, Wang Lu became his loyal lackey. Wang Lu was also impolite and directly promoted him to be the vice-sect leader, in charge of fighting and other matters. Daoist Ming Yun's cultivation base was slightly lower than Yi Chuchen's, but his actual combat ability was several times higher. He was a real gold medal fighter. Therefore, when he heard Daoist Ming Yun's words, Yi Chuchen felt a headache. This guy was crazy. Except for Wang Lu's words, he didn't listen to anyone. He simply couldn't be reasoned with, and he often spoke malicious words. In the sect, he was a first-class villain. Yi Chuchen was also impolite. You only know how to fight and kill, it's easy for you to say that. In any case, it's not your turn to contribute. Wang Lu smiled. Vice sect leader's words are wrong. This time, Mingyun also needs to contribute. No matter what kind of work we are in charge of, as long as we have a cultivation base, no one can escape. Yi Chuchen was somewhat surprised. Mingyun is just adding to the mess. Mingyun's eyes widened, and the madness in his eyes made Yi Chuchen's hair stand on end. Wang Lu laughed. Ha ha ha, of course, we have to give Mingyun the work that suits him. With that, he threw a piece of paper to Mingyun. Daoist Mingyun took a glance at it and was immediately attracted by it. He looked at it with rapt attention, and from time to time, he let out a sharp laugh. After sending Daoist Mingyun away, Wang Lu said to the others, "This time, the amount of work is extremely huge, and the resources invested are almost a heavy blow to the sect. However, this work is necessary, so even if it's hard and tiring, it must be completed, do you understand?" It was rare for the sect leader to seriously arrange things, so the people present also realized that this was not a trivial matter. They didn't see the two spirit sword sect elders flying in the air, but they vaguely felt that the wisdom sect seemed to be facing a big test of life and death. If they were still loose cultivators, in the face of this crisis, they would have already scattered like birds and beasts. However, at this time, as the high-level members of the wisdom sect, their hearts were filled with vigorous fighting spirit. 3 days passed by in the blink of an eye. These 3 days were probably the busiest 3 days for the high-level members of the wisdom sect. Especially, as the main force of the construction, the vice sect leader Yi Chuchen and his subordinates in charge of the 7 Stars department were so busy that they were almost out of breath. Among them, the dirty old man He Yun was the most miserable. After working overtime continuously, he originally intended to restore his magical power using the double cultivation method, but he found out that he was too tired and couldn't do it. The dirty old man cried and fainted on the spot. In these 3 days, Yi Chuchen also served as the infrastructure department head, leading the cultivators of the 7 Stars department to carry out a large-scale construction project. They crazily built arrays in a mountainous area next to the Wang family village, all in preparation for the Sword of Truth that was going to be held 3 days later. The drawing of the arrays came from the hands of Wang Lu, which was full of this spirit sword sect's top student's jaw-dropping crazy idea. When he received the drawing, Yi Chuchen's jaw almost hit the ground. On the drawing, more than 300 9th rank gathering spirit arrays were interlocked to form the skeleton, and more than 68th rank gathering spirit arrays were connected to each other, together forming the main body. In addition, the Tranquil Spirit Lamp, Pure Heart Pagoda, Spirit Awakening Hall, hundreds of different buildings were located in the middle of the array, forming a wonderful connection with each other. Although the grade of these buildings was not high, under the ingenious design, they could display an incredible effect. At the same time, in these 3 days, Lu Xian and Feng He quietly hid in the sky, silently watching Wang Lu's arrangement. Then, they witnessed the fanatical followers of the wisdom sect, in just 3 days, build a city in the middle of the mountain. Of course, it was not a big city. The open space between the mountains was not vast, but these hundreds of buildings, as well as the densely packed array circles, were more than the amount of work needed to build a city. To be able to complete all of this in 3 days, the wisdom sect used no less than 30,000 people. This was the result of the sect's unscrupulous recruitment of all the people in the surrounding area. Among them, there were more than 1,000 Qi cultivating stage cultivators. At the same time, the wisdom sect also hired hundreds of foundation establishment stage skilled workers from the mysterious Sky Mansion at a high price, which greatly enriched their strength. Of course, the most important thing was that vice sect leader Yi Chuchen and the team he led, without exception, personally entered the scene and did the most tiring and difficult work. Moreover, they constantly boosted the team's morale and excavated miraculous work efficiency. The other vice sect leader, Daoist Mingyun, was also not at ease. In these 3 days, he brought his own team of thugs to open the mountain and dig the river, releasing his crazy desire to destroy. And Wang Lu closely followed this group of people, leaving his own footprints on every trace of destruction. 3 days later, Wang Lu dismissed all the followers, walked alone into the new city in the mountain, and stood on the high altar that was built for him. On top of his head, Lu Xian indifferently looked at everything that Wang Lu had. "Are you ready?" Wang Lu was silent for a moment, opened his eyes, and then slowly opened his mouth. However, before his voice could come out, the mountains roared, the wind and clouds changed color, thousands of miles of clear sky instantly turned as dark as ink, day and night reversed, and a purple-blue lightning fell from the sky. It was like a heavenly tribulation had arrived. Wang Lu actually made the first move to gain the upper hand. Chapter 123. Good Guts. In the face of this world-changing scene, Lu Xian just blandly said these 3 words, not even bothering to lift his eyelids. The next moment, the purple-blue lightning snake roared and pounced, but when it was 10 meters away from Lu Xian's body, it collapsed with a loud bang, without making any sound. At this time, Wisdom Sect's vice-sect leader Yi Chuchen, who was watching this fight from afar, involuntarily sucked in a mouthful of cold air. Although the purple-blue lightning that Wang Lu attracted was not a divine tribulation, its power could not be underestimated. Although Wang Lu himself was only a qi cultivating stage cultivator, the one who attracted the lightning just now was not Wang Lu himself, but rather Wang Lu, who connected the entire new city through the altar under his feet, and then used the new city to drive the surrounding spiritual energy along the feng shui line, which suddenly erupted with energy. The power contained in that purple-blue lightning was enough to turn Yi Chuchen into a puff of smoke 10 times. In front of that lightning, a Shudan stage cultivator was as fragile as a mortal. According to Yi Chuchen's conjecture, this strike was so fierce, and Wang Lu launched it in a silent and unexpected manner. Even if the opponent was a Yuanying stage cultivator, he would still be flustered, right? However, in fact, Lu Xian didn't even need to lift a finger. Just by relying on his natural breathing of the surrounding spiritual energy, he was able to disintegrate the lightning. Although it was the same breathing of the surrounding spiritual energy, a Yuanying stage cultivator was far beyond the imagination of a Shudan stage cultivator. When a cultivator reached the Yuanying stage, they would no longer be restricted by the amount of spiritual energy they breathed, because the magical power in their jade mansion was self-generated and endless. What cultivators cared more about was the quality of the breathing, which emphasized the fine control of the spiritual energy. For Lu Xian, the 10 meters of space around him was almost an absolute domain, completely under his control. Although the purple-blue lightning was powerful, it was, after all, Wang Lu's trick. Without the condensation of primordial spirit, for Lu Xian, it was just an ownerless scattered spiritual energy, which could be disintegrated in a single breath. However, for Wang Lu's audacity to gain the upper hand by a show of strength, Lu Xian secretly nodded. To be able to maintain the desire to fight back in adversity or even desperate situation was not only a matter of courage, but also the key to turning defeat into victory. Wang Lu, this child's temperament was really fierce. Moreover, although that purple-blue lightning could not threaten him, it was a miracle that he could receive it with his qi cultivating stage, even if it was built with the support of a new city. After the lightning dissipated, Lu Xian was not even in a hurry to make his move. Instead, he looked at Wang Lu with an appreciative gaze. However, this time, it was Wang Lu's turn to be indifferent. Since the first move was ineffective, he immediately followed up with the next move. This time, Wang Lu's action was even bigger. His 10 fingers pointed at the 10 pillars on the altar and moved back and forth, up and down. These 10 pillars were the center of the entire new city. Under the command of Wang Lu, they drove the entire new city to make a rumbling sound. Hundreds of buildings in the city began to change their positions, looking for their own position in the grand picture formed by the combination of the Spirit Gathering Array and the Elemental Convergence Array. At the same time, the sky that turned dark after receiving the purple-blue lightning suddenly lit up. It was not that the night had dissipated, but that countless stars were lit up in the night, bright like a galaxy. In the distance, Yi Chuchen once again exclaimed. That was his stellar glint. In the hands of Wang Lu, relying on the power of the new city and the Feng Shui line, it unexpectedly evolved into a galaxy. The next moment, the galaxy fell. With a wave of his hand, Wang Lu plucked hundreds and thousands of stellar glints, which formed a dazzling meteor shower that bombarded Lu Xian. The corner of Lu Xian's mouth slightly curled up. The power of the falling galaxy might not be much stronger than the purple-green thunder earlier, but it was undoubtedly more powerful. Even with the help of the Dharma array, ordinary Qi cultivators would never be able to control such a grand scene. Of course, the disciples of the Lingjian school were doomed to not be compared with the common cultivators. However, Wang Lu's non-phase method was well known for its weak offense but strong defense. It was not easy for him to have such a scene, although it seemed like he was deliberately showing off. Unfortunately, although the scene that Wang Lu painstakingly created was gorgeous and extraordinary, it had no practical significance. Lu Xian still did not move a finger. Just by using his yuanying to breathe out the spiritual energy, the galaxy melted and the curtain of night receded. After this move, Lu Xian finally moved. Okay, I've seen enough. Take this sword. The next moment, an invisible sword penetrated the dozens of layers of defense that Wang Lu carefully arranged and gently touched Wang Lu's forehead. It was Lu Xian's Sword of Truth. The essence of the Sword of Truth was the Sword of Primordial Spirit. When it was launched, Lu Xian only needed to circulate his primordial spirit, and there would not be any fluctuation of magical power. In terms of being silent, it was even more difficult to guard against than Wang Lu's purple-blue lightning. Although Wang Lu and the Wisdom Sect's elders had spent a lot of effort, in the end, they could not figure out the means of a yuanying stage cultivator. In front of Lu Xian, the defensive line that they arranged was vulnerable. The Sword of Truth contained a trace of Lu Xian's misty immortal heart. Although it was only a trace, for Wang Lu, it was like a big river, menacing. Wang Lu only felt that his primordial spirit was shaken, and then it was swallowed by the Sword of Truth's torrential sword intent. His primordial spirit could only see darkness. Bang! Just at this time, a dull breaking sound awakened Wang Lu from the darkness. He saw that one of the 10 pillars on the altar had been broken, and at the same time, a corner of the entire new city was also broken. More than 39th rank arrays disappeared from the ground, and together, they detonated a shattering bell sound that resounded throughout the primordial spirit of his inner mansion. Such a painful loss only awakened Wang Lu from his absent-mindedness for a moment. However, this short moment was enough for Wang Lu to respond. His right thumb and middle finger gently touched each other, and his non-phase Heart Sutra was launched. The 9 pillars rumbled, and the entire new city seemed to be shrouded in an emerald green light. Good! In the sky, Lu Xian could not help but exclaim in admiration. The level of Wang Lu's array arrangement was not high, but the hundreds of arrays were interlocked, reflecting an extremely solid foundation of array skills. Only on this point, among the disciples who came to this experiential learning, there were only a few people who could be compared to him. However, among those disciples who specialized in array skills, no one could have the ability to grasp the timing and layout as accurately as Wang Lu. The shattering bell had long been prepared. As long as Wang Lu was absent-minded, it would automatically activate. Obviously, he had already expected that he could not block the sharp sword intent of the Sword of Truth. This kid was self-aware. And the layer of emerald green light behind was the awakening spirit light. Wherever the light shrouded, it could make people excited and stay awake all night. Wang Lu wrapped himself in this light in order to prevent himself from fainting under the interrogation of the Sword of Truth. His response was also appropriate. What was more rare was that it only needed a gesture to activate, which was really rare and valuable for a disciple of the 6th level of Qi cultivating stage. At this point, how could Lu Xian not see Wang Lu's plan? These 3 days of arrangement fully demonstrated the amazing organizational mobilization power of the Wisdom Sect. How could a highly disciplined organization be compared to a secular cult? Although during the construction of the new city, because too many people launched the heaven-burning blood technique, the entire valley was filled with the smell of blood, but the vigorous fighting spirit showed the difference between the wisdom sect and the other cults. Then, Wang Lu personally went into battle. With a flash of lightning and a shower of stars, of course, he was not overestimating himself by trying to shake a Yuanying stage elder, but rather, he was showing off his amazing fine control and timing ability. These were not reflected in his cultivation level, but in actual combat, they were very crucial skills. This was a display of his gains in the past 8 months of experiential learning. And Lu Xian also admitted that, based on these points alone, Wang Lu was already a first-class figure among this group of disciples. At least, he was not a waste who was addicted to the temptation of money and power. This was Wang Lu's self-proof of innocence. It's indeed not bad. Lu Xian softly sighed in the air. At this time, he recalled that 3 days ago, in the inn's guest room, Wang Lu's provocative words made the anger in his heart dissipate a lot. As a reward-giver elder, he always somewhat favored the outstanding disciple, and this child indeed had the capital to be arrogant. It's just that, there's always someone better, and there's always someone better. As a successor disciple of the Lingjian school, just this step was far from enough. Compared to the other 2 successor disciples, it was still far from enough. Let alone the test of the Sword of Truth had just begun. Just now, the sword intent that made Wang Lu faint was just the outer shell of the Sword of Truth. The real core, which was the power from the misty immortal heart, was still hidden behind it. Right now, Wang Lu, who was in the awakening spirit light, was facing the power of the Sword of Truth. In a trance, the new city in the valley dissipated like clouds and mist, replaced by a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. Wang Lu stood on the mountain of corpses of an unknown number of people, surrounded by a chilly wind and the wailing of ghosts. Wang Lu didn't need to think to know that this was an illusion created by the Sword of Truth. The real test began here, and under the Sword of Truth, the possibility of him passing the test was really not high. To be honest, with the previous round of performances, he had already proven his strength. Even if he gave up now, it didn't matter if the defense of his heart was broken by the Sword of Truth. It was originally an impossible task, and not being able to complete it was not a sin. Uncle Lu Xian loved talents the most. Most likely, he would just reprimand him, but how could Wang Lu's plan be so simple? It was just the Sword of Truth, let's face it head-on. Therefore, Wang Lu let the chilly wind howl. The mountain of corpses under his feet trembled, and one by one, the resurrected corpses struggled to drill out from the fortress of blood and bones. They covered the whole mountain and slowly approached the mountain where Wang Lu was. Such a terrifying scene was directly projected into the primordial spirit, which was enough to make most cultivators with weak minds lose their wits. However, how could Wang Lu show the slightest bit of fear? Instead, the corner of his mouth hooked up into a sneer. He crossed his arms and waited for the approaching corpses. After a few breaths, the nearest corpse had already arrived in front of Wang Lu. Its fleshy skull swayed left and right, and from its mouth, it spat out vague syllables. Sect. Leader, Wang Lu. Wang Lu snorted, and then said with a smile, "Don't deliberately mystify me, I know what you want to say. You want me, the sect leader, to pay with my life for the death of the wisdom sect, right?" As soon as his voice fell, his smile suddenly converged and turned into a frosty expression. "Pay your mother, go eat shit." After he finished speaking, he extended his hand and pressed it on the nearest skeleton. Then, he pushed it down the mountain. The corpse rolled on the ground, and halfway down the mountain, it was broken into pieces of flesh and blood residue. Wang Lu's brutality immediately angered the corpses. Tens of thousands of corpses clamored, which made the gloomy atmosphere in the surrounding area even more intense. The illusion of the Sword of Truth was not afraid of being broken by violence, because once the tested person resorted to violence to solve the problem, most of the time, the person's heart was already weak. And the strength of the illusion of the Sword of Truth was precisely dependent on the opponent's heart. Once the opponent had a weak heart, then in the illusion, how could the opponent not be created? Even if the opponent was a fierce Dashang stage cultivator, the Sword of Truth could still project 17 or 18 true immortals to tear the opponent into pieces. However, behind Wang Lu's violence, there was a firm and incomprehensible self-confidence. "Dregs, what qualifications do you have to roar in front of me?" This vigorous roar was like a rolling thunder that rolled down from the top of the mountain, causing the clamor of the corpses to stop. Without waiting for them to move again, Wang Lu raised his sword-like eyebrows and pointed his finger forward. "You are the defeated who died in the Wisdom Sect's expansion war. Your resentment is monstrous, and you blame the pain of your death on me, wishing that you could cut me into pieces. But I, not evading nor escaping, gladly accepted this killing sin, bearing your resentment. Because the enemy's pain is my happiness, and the enemy's complaint is my heavenly music. Since I stand on the opposing side, I have a clear conscience regarding your killing." With that, his finger changed direction. "And you are the Wisdom Sect's warriors who died in the Wisdom Sect's expansion war. You have remorse in your heart, fantasizing that if you didn't join the Wisdom Sect, if you didn't stand on the front line, you could drag out an ignoble existence. Therefore, you blame the resentment of your death on me. Toward you, I calmly treat you with contempt. Because there are 10 times, 100 times more martyrs than you, who have no complaints or regrets for the sect's ideals. Compared to them, you are as light as dust. But a real warrior should leave their resentment to the enemy, should always fix their eyes on the front. After death, they should gather their former subordinates and return to the human world from hell. When you give up your resentment toward the enemy and turn it into remorse, you are not worthy to be a warrior, not worthy to enjoy the glory of the Wisdom Sect. I disdain the death of the fallen. As for you, you are the cultivators who died prematurely under the heaven-burning blood technique. You think that you have been deceived, that your grievances are like the flying snow in June, that I have ruined your long life. Toward you, I only have indifference and contempt. Because it is me who gave you the opportunity to touch the immortal path, it is me who gave you, these mortals, the possibility to go one step further. It is me who let you sublimate from being destined to die silently, becoming the founder of the sublimation of the 9 regions. Let alone the heaven-burning blood technique has never been forcibly promoted. Whether you are a mediocre person or a dazzling hero, even if it is only for a moment, the decision is in your hands. You have chosen to shine, so you don't have the qualification to regret the price of shining. Today's clamor will only make you ungrateful, so your death is not to be regretted." A series of roars deterred the millions of corpses. At this moment, Wang Lu's imposing manner reached its peak. Even this hell-like mountain of corpses and sea of blood couldn't stop his panicky eloquence. The millions of corpses actually didn't move forward, and the cold wind from hell also weakened a lot. Behind the blood clouds in the sky, there was a golden light, as if at any time the clouds would break the sky and the sun would shine. Interesting. At the same time, Lu Xian, who was watching all of this, smiled and nodded. Interesting? I think it's all sophistry. Fang He disapproved of this. Lu Xian said, although he is twisting words and forcing logic, he is not simply showing off his eloquence. To be able to say such a thing in front of the Sword of Truth, it can be seen that deep in his heart, he also thinks so. Even if he faces a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood, his conscience is clear. Fang He shook his head. This kind of clear conscience can only show the distortion of his heart. Lu Xian said, "Junior brother, you're using the standard of ordinary people to judge him. Don't forget, this child is also the leader of a sect. As the saying goes, the merciful cannot command an army. If he doesn't have such a distorted state of mind, how can he run a sect? Or rather, in the 9 regions, which successful leader doesn't have a bit of paranoia and distortion?" Fang He just shook his head, but didn't argue with Lu Xian. Lu Xian said, "Rest assured, you don't know that the power of the Sword of Truth is far more than this. This child Wang Lu can only be a bit unyielding in the first test, but in the next test, he won't be able to withstand it." This was also a matter of course. If the Sword of Truth could only rely on the toughness of his heart, it wouldn't have the effect of proving his innocence. Because even if a person indiscriminately killed innocent people, as long as he firmly believed that his indiscriminate killing was reasonable, he could still pass this test. It's just that he might not have the courage to roar like Wang Lu did. A person's clear conscience was not the same as being shameless, because the sword of truth was not asking about a person's 7 orifices exquisite heart, but the Tao heart. The so-called Tao heart was the perception and understanding of the immortal path during the immortal cultivation. Although the immortal path could be divided into 3,000 great Taos, each one had its bottom line and foundation. If one wanted to follow these Taos, one must accept the rules of the boundless world. One could not use one's own ideas to cover the rules of the boundless world, and one could not use the deformed 3 views to understand the great Tao. Thus, it was impossible to be a righteous and shameless person, unless one cultivated the devil cultivation method, or if one's primordial spirit had been cultivated to a pure and untainted state, then it was another matter. Wang Lu did not cultivate the devil cultivation method, and his primordial spirit was far from being pure and untainted. Therefore, when the power of the sword of truth was truly revealed, that strong coercion suddenly couldn't be maintained. In the illusion, the mountain of corpses, the sea of blood, and the tens of thousands of corpses all disappeared, leaving only the boundless darkness. After an unknown period of time, when Wang Lu's consciousness began to blur in the boundless darkness, a voice blasted out, "You're guilty." Buzz. Wang Lu was almost scared out of his wits on the spot. When these 3 words rang, thousands of pictures poured into his mind. He saw the cultivators groaning under the wisdom sex expansion knife, saw the civilians who suddenly died on the spot due to the excessive cultivation of the heaven-burning blood technique, and also saw the wisdom sex workers who worked day and night and died prematurely, as well as the relatives who wept next to their coffins. These were all real karma. Whether you admit it or not, the blood on your hands would not be washed clean because of this. Wang Lu naturally knew the difficulty of this test, so he immediately tightened his heart's defense and resisted with all his strength. His primordial spirit cultivation was not enough, so he couldn't directly face the test of the heart's examination. Therefore, at this time, he used all of his means. The remaining 9 sacrificial pillars of the new city suddenly flew into the air, and correspondingly, not only the new city, but also the surrounding undulating mountain range. The green mountains and clear water trembled under the light of the sacrificial pillars, and then more spiritual energy was squeezed out from the feng shui line. Along with the operation of the new city's spirit gathering array, the spiritual energy rushed toward Wang Lu like a river flowing into the sea. At this time, the spiritual energy was turbulent, several times more violent than the spiritual energy tide when he built the primal chaos altar. If it were an ordinary qi cultivating stage cultivator, they would immediately explode and die. However, in the middle of the sacrificial altar, Wang Lu was as steady as Mount Tai. All of the spiritual energy was absorbed into his body, and in an instant, the platinum rainstorm in his inner mansion set off a flood. This special magical power that was transformed from the void spirit root actually didn't have enough time to evaporate. Of course, the real protagonist was the golden liquid that was extracted from more than 200 sword bones. When the sword bones were first formed, the golden liquid that Wang Lu inhaled and exhaled was accumulated bit by bit. Now, it was as if 206 floodgates had been opened, forming a golden ocean in his inner mansion. At the same time, the primordial spirit in his inner mansion that was wrapped in darkness began to rotate crazily, like the eye of the sea stirring the entire ocean. After a moment, the primordial spirit shone brightly. It actually forced back the darkness. Good. At this moment, Lu Xian and Fang He cheered in unison. It was not for Wang Lu's huge array that was used to absorb spiritual energy, nor was it for the miraculous elixir that was used to strengthen the sword bones. Instead, it was for the last step, the technique of using magical power to strengthen the primordial spirit. For cultivators, magical power and primordial spirit were 2 independent things. The primordial spirit controlled the magical power, and the magical power nourished the primordial spirit. However, the 2 could not be changed at will, unless, like Wang Lu, using a brilliant mental cultivation method. mental cultivation method was the transformation of the mind and the method. For example, Lu Xian, Fang He, and other Yuanying stage-old monsters, they naturally knew this technique. However, Wang Lu had only been cultivating for 3 years, and his cultivation was only at the 6th level of the Qi cultivating stage, yet he was able to use the mental cultivation method to transform it. It was simply a miracle. 5th Junior Sister's new version of the non-phase mental cultivation method has improved again. After a moment, Lu Xian sighed with emotion, but the main thing is that Wang Lu, this child, is formidable. To be able to achieve this step, this sword of truth, Fang He coldly snorted. He still can't block it. After all, his cultivation is still too shallow. Lu Xian pondered for a moment. It's not that there's no chance, at least there's a 1 in 10,000 chance. Unless he's willing to go all out, there's not even a 1 in 10,000 chance. However, as long as he's not an idiot, there's no need for him to go all out for the sword of truth. To be able to reach this step, who would be too harsh on him? He should be clear in his heart that he won't persist to the end. Lu Xian smiled and shook his head. Junior brother, do you also have a fondness for talent? Fang He turned his head. This kind of crooked talent, forget it. If he can be like your family's little Lu Li, it's not bad. Lu Xian's smile suddenly became a bit bitter. If little Lu Li can have a little bit of Wang Lu's cleverness, I'll be satisfied. The two elders chatted for a while and didn't have any more expectations for the next outcome. However, at this time, in the face of the most severe test of the sword of truth, in the deepest darkness, Wang Lu's primordial spirit unexpectedly went tit for tat and didn't retreat even half a step. Lu Xian was extremely surprised. He's going all out. Fang He frowned. What's he thinking? However, no matter what Wang Lu was thinking at this time, there was no doubt that he had chosen a dead end. The sword of truth was not a sword that could injure people. Even if the heart's defense was broken, it would only be a defeat without injury, and there was no danger. However, Wang Lu had overloaded his mental cultivation method, and the damage to his body, inner mansion, and primordial spirit would be fatal. And the chance of him successfully resisting the sword of truth was at most 1 in 10,000. Whether it was Lu Xian or Fang He, they didn't expect that Wang Lu's temperament would become so unyielding after 8 months of leaving the mountain. In order to prove his innocence, he didn't even care about his life. At this time, without any extra thoughts, Lu Xian only froze for a moment, then he turned his primordial spirit upside down, and the darkness around Wang Lu's primordial spirit immediately dissipated. The last half of the sword of truth was taken back by Lu Xian. Suddenly losing the oppression, Wang Lu was also shocked. He immediately dispersed his spiritual power and stopped circulating his mental cultivation method. However, his whole body was physically and mentally injured, and he was extremely tired. Standing on the altar, Wang Lu couldn't even maintain his standing posture. He was tottering, but the smile on his face was still so confident and calm. Uncle, disciple, has a clear conscience. Chapter 124. When he talked to Lu Xian and Fang He again, it was already half a day later. Although Lu Xian finally withdrew the sword of truth and did not let Wang Lu die needlessly, but the overloading of the non-phase Heart Sutra still caused his primordial spirit to be overdrawn and he suffered some minor injuries. The two elders naturally would not sit back and watch. They quickly healed Wang Lu's injuries, but the overdrawn primordial spirit still needed some time to recuperate. After half a day, although Wang Lu was weak, he regained consciousness. When he saw Lu Xian and Fang He, he smiled. Uncle, disciple has a clear conscience. Lu Xian smiled bitterly. I know you have a clear conscience. You have passed my test. In fact, strictly speaking, Wang Lu did not succeed in proving himself with the sword of truth. In fact, the last test could not be passed. It was Lu Xian who took the initiative to withdraw the last and most severe test, not letting him experience the test of certain failure. But from another point of view, since it was Lu Xian who withdrew it, it could not be said that Wang Lu lost. Therefore, the second elder simply considered him to have passed. "Thank you, uncle." Wang Lu nodded to express his gratitude, and then asked, "I don't know if disciples' cultivation level is worthy of uncle's painstaking arrangement for this experiential learning?" Hearing this overbearing question, Lu Xian did not get angry. Instead, he calmly replied, "Compared to the disciples of the same batch, whether it's the speed of improvement or the current strength, you've already far surpassed them." After listening to this, Wang Lu immediately caught the point: the disciples of the same batch. As one of the rare true disciples of Lingjian school, although Wang Lu's cultivation progress had fallen behind in the past 2 years because of his pain in the ass spiritual root attribute, his goal had always been to become an inner disciple like Zhu Qin and Wen Bao. The opponent of a successor disciple must also be a successor disciple. This time, there were 3 successor disciples who went down the mountain to gain experience. Besides him, the other 2 successor disciples were Wang Lu's targets. However, they had entered the mountain earlier than Wang Lu and were not in the same group. The meaning behind Lu Xian's words was very clear: compared to the other 2 true disciples, you don't have any advantage. This truly surprised Wang Lu. Indeed, because he had been managing the sect for the past 8 months, he had not been able to spend all his time and energy on increasing his cultivation. However, the various experiences he had as a sect master allowed him to experience a rare state of mind that other disciples would never be able to experience. It was extremely beneficial to his soul. In the past 8 months, his cultivation had only increased by 1 stage, which was indeed not too outstanding. That was because his greatest gain was the condensation of his primordial spirit. In addition, the many battles during the expansion of the Wisdom sect also made Wang Lu's actual combat ability advance by leaps and bounds. Even his non-phase method, which he was not good at, could now be displayed with the help of the array. In terms of comprehensive strength, compared to before he went down the mountain, his strength had skyrocketed several times. However, this kind of progress was actually not enough to surpass the other 2 successor disciples. TSK, this competition pressure was a bit big. Fortunately, he still had a sect with more than 1 million followers as the result of his experiential learning. Adding this, it was estimated that no other disciple would be able to catch up to him. "Wang Lu, don't be happy too early." Lu Xian sighed, "Although I've passed this test, this is not the main point." Wang Lu, of course, knew that from the beginning to the end, Elder Fang He was the key figure. Therefore, Wang Lu very seriously looked at Fang He, waiting for him to speak. This outspoken elder looked at the still pale and weak Wang Lu, and he could not help but shake his head and sigh. "I know what you want to say." The Wisdom sect's matter was written in Zhu Qin's report. When Bao said it, and me and senior brother Lu Xian also witnessed it with our own eyes. It indeed has its merits, but to say it's a cult is indeed a bit biased. Wang Lu slightly released a smile. However, this doesn't mean that it's open and above board. Strictly speaking, your Wisdom sect still belongs to the category of a cult. Wang Lu immediately said, "But we've already obtained the official certification of the Great Ming country." Fang He snappily glared at him. Previously, the Thousand Spirits sect was the White Moon country's national religion, so how could it not be a cult? Mortal World certification. You actually have the nerve to take it seriously. Our Wisdom sect is rooted in the grassroots, serving the grassroots, so naturally, the voice from the grassroots is the most important. As the saying goes, reputation is not as good as gold or silver cup. Silly. The bigger and faster you develop in the mortal world, the more you can't wash it clean, and you can't explain it clearly. Because with the means of a cultivator, playing with mortals is too easy. Not to mention you have millions of believers. When the Devil's sect was rampant, the Devil's sect leader only needed to issue an order, and hundreds of millions of people would risk their lives for him. Don't tell me it's not a Devil's sect, but a righteous sect. And compared to the Devil's sect, your scale is simply not worth mentioning. Therefore, the saying that the immortal path and the mortal path are different means that cultivators and mortals must draw a clear line. The immortal cultivation sect can't be too involved in the mortal world, especially can't directly take in mortals as believers. Your millions of believers are actually a Achilles' heel. Elder Fang He changed his usual iron-faced fiend appearance and said in a rare earnest and well-intentioned manner, I know you have a lot of reasons and excuses, but whether it's the heaven-burning blood technique or your millions of believers, they're all problems that can't be avoided, they're a stain that can't be washed clean. Indeed, our Lingjian school doesn't prohibit the disciples from setting up a sect at the foot of the mountain, although with your qualifications, setting up a sect is already suspected of violating the rules. But in any case, the sect that doesn't conform to the rules should be banned as a cult, which is a matter of course. Wang Lu asked with a smile, which sect's rule doesn't conform to? The Lingjian school's rule, as well as the Wanxian League's rule, are all like that. Wang Lu thought for a moment, and then said, if Uncle is willing to cover for me, I think the Wanxian League wouldn't be able to detect it, right? Moreover, the Blue River region is, after all, our Lingjian school's territory, so even if there's a violation, it's easy to fool them. Strictly speaking, the Xingjing sect actually has a lot of violations, but I haven't seen anyone pursue it. Fang He's eyebrows raised. Nonsense. Didn't you listen to what I just said to you? Wang Lu asked again, is there no room for accommodation? Uncle, you've also seen it, no matter from which point of view, the development of the wisdom sect has more advantages than disadvantages, so why let the rigid rules imprison it? Fang He shook his head. That's the rule, it can't be changed. If I don't know about it, then it's fine. But since I know, I can't ignore it. I'm the sect's disciplinary elder, if I can't strictly abide by the rules, then the rules would be useless, and the sect would fall apart. Upon hearing this, Wang Lu was silent for a moment. Then, according to Uncle's meaning, disband the sect and follow me back to the mountain to be punished by the sect's rules. Considering that you don't have the intention to do evil, nor do you seek personal gain, and your experiential learning is good, according to the rules, you need to go into closed-door training on the mountain for 3 years. Upon hearing this, Lu Xian also sighed. Disbanding the sect and going into closed-door training for 3 years, this punishment was neither light nor heavy, it could be said to be impartial. Of course, in Wang Lu's opinion, it might be difficult to accept, especially the disbanding of the sect. Actually, junior brother Fang He's love for Wang Lu was very obvious, and he didn't completely deny the existence of the wisdom sect. However, when it came to the sect's rules, he would absolutely not have the slightest bit of ambiguity. Unless the sect leader changed his decision, Fang He's judgment would always be cold and ruthless. Wang Lu's 8 months of effort was indeed a pity. However, on the immortal cultivation path, there were too many pitiful things, so it was better to just treat it as a rare experience. However, at this time, he heard Wang Lu say with a smile, very well, since Uncle has no prejudice against my wisdom sect and is just doing things according to the rules, then it's easy. Fang He was startled. What's easy? Wang Lu asked with a smile, may I ask Uncle, although the sect's rules prohibit the operation of a cult, but the sect's definition of a cult is very vague, and it lacks the relevant details, right? In terms of familiarity with the sect's rules, even a top student like Wang Lu couldn't surpass the disciplinary elder. Fang He replied with a sinking voice, indeed, but this is not the loophole. The Lingjian school's definition of a cult is consistent with the Wanxian League, and the Wanxian League's definition of a cult is very detailed. Your wisdom sect just happened to touch its many forbidden areas. In other words, because the Wanxian League has determined that the wisdom sect is a cult, the Lingjian school has also determined that the wisdom sect is a cult. Fang He frowned. He didn't understand the meaning of Wang Lu's entanglement here, but he still nodded. That's indeed the case. Just as he said that, he saw Wang Lu reveal a heartfelt happy smile. Then I'm relieved, I've been waiting for you to say that. With that, his smile converged a bit, turning into a slightly sarcastic one. The youth stretched out his index finger, placed it on his forehead, and then softly opened his mouth. Wu Feihua, it's me. At the same time, from Wang Lu's primordial spirit, a charming woman's voice came, Sect leader, oh no, it's Mr. Director. Fang He was startled. Psychic precious jade? For Yuanying stage elders, the sound transmission between the primordial spirits of low-level cultivators simply couldn't be hidden from their perception. Therefore, the dialogue between Wang Lu and Wu Feihua could be heard by Fang He and Lu Xian. They could even see Wu Feihua's charming face from thousands of miles away. Wang Lu asked with a smile, "Is it done?" Wu Feihua sweetly said, "Mr. Director, at that time, you seriously assigned this task to me, telling me to complete it within 3 days. Of course, I'll go all out and live up to your expectations. Let me see it." "Okay, but how does Mr. Director plan to reward me?" "I'll add 2 personal secretaries to your public relations department. I'm sure they're both at the foundation establishment stage. They'll also be good-looking furnaces that can considerately comfort you day and night. What do you think?" "Oh, thank you, Sir Director, for your kindness. But if Sir Director is willing to personally reward me, that would be for the best. I guarantee that I will serve you comfortably and make you wish you were dead. Hee, if you talk nonsense again, I'll remove you from your position." Wu Feihua quickly restrained her smile and honestly transmitted the image of the thing that Wang Lu wanted through the psychic precious jade. Seeing the image, Wang Lu just faintly smiled, but Fang He and Lu Xian simultaneously widened their eyes and exclaimed, "This is impossible." Something that could make the knowledgeable Yuanying stage elders lose their composure like this was naturally not an ordinary thing. In the image transmitted by the psychic jade, a golden talisman seal was quietly held in his palm. The surface of the talisman seal had a wave-like luster flowing on it. Although it was impossible to sense the special waves that this talisman seal should have, the words engraved on the talisman seal were very clear. Wisdom Sect member of the Wanxian League. Chapter 125. The golden seal caused the 2 Yuanying stage elders to fall into a great shock. How could this be? Fang He's eyes widened as he re-examined the image transmitted by the psychic jade countless times. However, there was only one conclusion: the seal was not fake, and the meaning of it was also simple and clear. Wang Lu's Wisdom Sect has passed the qualification certification and officially joined the Wanxian League, becoming a member of the Wanxian League. How could this be? No, this sentence pattern was completely unable to express the shock in Fang He and Lu Xian's heart. The correct way to say it was at least. How the F***ck is this possible? Even if they were shocked to hear that the sect leader Feng Yin Daoist master's real body was a 16-year-old beautiful girl, the 2 elders would not have this kind of shock. For a time, Fang He didn't even have the time to think that Wang Lu taking out this seal at this time was actually a bit like a slap in the face. He only felt that the confusion in his heart was like an abyss crack that was tearing the earth apart, becoming bigger and bigger, unable to be smoothed out. How could this be? How could this be? How could this be? For a time, there were thousands of words in Fang He's heart, but it was like a fishbone stuck in his throat. Anyone with basic reason could see that Wisdom Sect was an out-and-out evil sect. Only Wang Lu, this kind of non-phase peak disciple with an astonishingly thick face, could flatly deny it without batting an eyelid. In the past few days, the scene that Fang He and Lu Xian witnessed had all confirmed this point. The heaven-burning blood technique, as well as the millions of civilian followers, were absolutely in line with the characteristics of an evil sect. Why were the 2 elders so angry when they went down the mountain? Because whether it was for the Lingjian school or for Wang Lu himself, the negative impact of running an evil sect was extremely serious, especially for Wang Lu himself. Once the news spread, Wang Lu would be condemned by thousands of people, and he would have no place to stay in the entire 9 regions. Regarding the issue of evil sect, in the Wanxian League, its standard was second only to the Devil Sect, which was simply indisputable. You said you have the official certification of the Great Ming country? If the problem got out of hand, the entire Great Ming Kingdom would collapse in a matter of days. Using the Great Ming country's official certification to try to cover up the fact that they were a cult was like using a dead leaf to deal with a woman's geranium. There should be a limit to overestimating one's capabilities, right? As for the sublimation of the world and the liberation of productivity, go talk to your corpse when you reincarnate. Therefore, even if Wang Lu had shown an amazing strength worthy of being a successor disciple under the Sword of Truth, Fang He still could not let him pass. At this time, indulging him would only destroy him. However, at this moment, the glittering golden seal was like a giant mockery, completely crushing the anger and doubts of the two elders. Wisdom's sect was a cult. Who would dare to call it a cult when the Wanxian League's authentication seal was placed here? If the certification from Deming Kingdom was not enough, then the certification from the Wanxian League should be enough. Was there any organization in 9 regions more authoritative than the Wanxian League? Of course not. However, on the other hand, Fang He and Lu Xian didn't think that what they had seen and heard in the past 3 days was an illusion. The cult characteristics of the Wisdom sect were also not fake. Therefore, how the F***ck was this possible? After being confused and in pain for a long time, the two elders still couldn't figure out the reason behind it. However, Wang Lu didn't bother to explain. He just smiled and watched the two elders sink deeper and deeper into their confusion. Finally, Lu Xian sighed and took the initiative to open his mouth. How did you do it? Wang Lu smiled. Actually, it's really very simple. I spent a lot of money to bribe the elder in charge of the Wanxian League's membership affairs. Puff. The two elders were petrified. They stood there stiffly, but they could hear the sound of their nascent souls spitting out blood. Wang Lu spread out his hands and said with a smile, "That's why I said that a lot of people don't really understand the essence of the Wanxian League. Instead of saying that it's the Immortal Cultivation Alliance, the guardian of order in the 9 regions, it's better to put it in simpler terms. It's just a high-end, westernized bureaucratic organization, that's all. Since it's a bureaucratic organization, it has the inevitable flaw of a bureaucratic organization, corruption. Of course, as the beneficiary, I can't help but applaud, corruption is good." The two elders tried their best not to drop their jaws. The specific operation method is also very simple. 2 million spirit stones in exchange for the most basic membership seal. This is the biggest transaction since the establishment of the Wisdom sect, and I think it's still a profit. 2 million spirit stones. Lu Xian and Fang He looked at each other in dismay. A trace of understanding flashed through their hearts. For a big sect, 2 million spirit stones was like a drop in the bucket. However, for an individual cultivator, this was an astronomical figure. Didn't they see that the monthly stipend of the 5th elder of Spirit Sword sect was only a few hundred spirit stones? Her total annual income was only around 10,000. Of course, this was also because her contribution to the sect was too low, and she often caused trouble. Therefore, her status was far lower than the other elders. For example, Lu Xian, who had poured a lot of effort into the sect, in 1 year, he received hundreds of thousands of spirit stones as an offering from the sect. And the 6th elder, Lu Li, who was the best at managing the sect, was known to have a net worth of tens of millions. However, that was the net worth of an elder who was one of the 5 uniques of the Union of 10,000 Immortals. For an elder who was in charge of the alliance of a sect, or even a grassroots sect, no matter how big his appetite was, 2 million spirit stones was enough to choke him to death. It was more than enough to fill the cultivators under him. With such a huge bribe, it was not unthinkable to exchange for a membership seal. Especially since the branch of the Wanxian League in the Blue River region was corrupt and bloated, this kind of thing could be done. The Lingjian school was usually aloof and low-key, and it didn't have any dealings with these organizations. The elder's impression of the Wanxian League was still at the Wanxian League's headquarters in the central region. The environment there was much better, so for a while, he couldn't respond. Now that he understood all of this, that glittering golden seal was not that unbelievable anymore. The problem was 2 million spirit stones was not a small number for a middle-rank sect. Although the Wisdom sect's development momentum was vigorous, it was only 8 months of accumulation. During this period, they also vigorously invested in the infrastructure, so where did they get 2 million spirit stones? Seeing the elder's doubt, Wang Lu somewhat proudly explained, "Of course, it's because of the investment." Investment? Yes, it's the result of our vigorous communication with the mysterious Sky Mansion. When it comes to money, in the 9 regions, there's no more suitable target than the mysterious Sky Mansion, right? Lu Xian was puzzled. Why would the mysterious Sky Mansion lend you so much money? Because the wisdom sect's money-making ability is enough to make people go crazy. Although the initial investment is too large, and the operating cost is extremely high, resulting in not much surplus, but from the income point of view, the wisdom sect's annual income is nearly 1 million spirit stones, which has already surpassed many of the low-rank sects in the Wanxian League. Moreover, the future development space is immeasurable. After all, the wisdom sect only occupies the great Ming country. Lu Xian gawked for a moment, and then immediately understood. Less than 1 million per year didn't seem to be much, but for cultivators in a mortal cultivation sect, 10 or 20 years was just like a snap of the fingers, which was a huge profit of tens of millions. You want the mysterious Sky Mansion to participate in the management? How could that be possible? Wang Lu sneered. Dividends are fine, but if we let that group of corrupt businessmen who only believe in money to run the wisdom sect, this sect will be finished. If you don't let the mysterious Sky Mansion participate in the management, are they willing to lend you the money? Wang Lu said, therefore, I signed a bet agreement with them. Within 10 years, I will give them a high dividend. If within 10 years, the mysterious Sky Mansion's dividend reaches a certain amount, then we're even. If not, I will offer the wisdom sect to them. Whether they want to kill the goose that lays the golden eggs, or let the water flow slowly, it's all up to them. Lu Xian still found it hard to believe. Even so, with the current scale of your wisdom sect, being able to persuade the other party to come up with 2 million spirit stones is really, Wang Lu said with a smile, the public relations division head is competent, that's all. Thinking of the seductive female cultivator on the other side of the psychic jade, Lu Xian frowned. However, inwardly, he roughly understood that the deal with the mysterious Sky Mansion was obviously dirty. At this point, Wang Lu's whole plan was finally clear at a glance. Public relations with the mysterious Sky Mansion to get a sky-high investment, and then, with a big stroke of the pen, he used the investment on public relations with the Wanxian League to get the authentication seal, thus confusing black and white, reversing the heaven and earth, washing the evil sect into the shining golden Wanxian League. The steps were very simple, but there were too many unimaginable things to enumerate. The 2 elders were silent for a long time, but it was still difficult for them to suppress the shock in their hearts. If Wang Lu's 6th level qi cultivating stage, combined with the array and the power of the feng shui line, was able to persist until the last hurdle under the sword of truth was already a miracle, then the wisdom sect's whitewash was beyond a miracle, it was simply a miracle. Were it not for the fact that Wang Lu himself was a successor disciple of the Spirit Sword sect, with his identity as the sect leader of a sect that joined the union of 10,000 immortals, in theory, he could even be on equal footing with Lu Xian and Fang He. Even though his cultivation was only at the 6th level of qi cultivating stage. Thinking to this, Lu Xian could not help but sigh. Just now, Wang Lu had asked him about his harvest in this experiential learning compared to the other 2 successor disciples. Lu Xian knew that in terms of cultivation alone, compared to those 2 evildoers, he was still slightly inferior. However, if he added the wisdom sect into the equation, those 2 people would probably not be able to compare to him. However, Fang He's mind was even more tangled. There were thousands of words that he wanted to say, but they were stuck in his throat. Until Wang Lu smiled and asked him, "Uncle, do you have anything to say?" Fang He was silent for a long time. "I have nothing to say." Rationally speaking, although Wang Lu's method was beautiful, in the end, it couldn't be seen in the light. Especially since the Wanxian League authentication was obtained through a huge amount of bribery, any cultivator with a sense of justice would not be able to accept it. However, Fang He was not the messenger of justice. As the disciplinary elder of Lingjian School, he didn't even need to care about the rules of the Wanxian League, he only needed to guard the dignity of the school's rules. However, the Lingjian school's rules didn't stipulate that one couldn't bribe an outsider. In addition to the principle of not killing, raping, stealing, and other rules, when it came to matters outside the school, the Lingjian school didn't have many rules. This was the so-called tight on the inside but loose on the outside. And from the point of view of procedure, although Wang Lu's conduct was out of line, it didn't obviously violate the school's rules. Even if it was strictly required, at most, Wang Lu would only need to write a few remorse letters and deduct some sex points, which was not painful at all. Thinking to this, Lu Xian couldn't help but ask, since you've already made this arrangement, why do you need to use the sword of truth to claim your innocence? Wang Lu helplessly said, because according to the original plan, this plan should be launched in a few months, when the time is more ripe. Unfortunately, Martial Uncle, you guys came too fast, forcing me to start the plan in advance. Although I've done a lot of advance work, the Public Relations Division Chief has gone beyond his level, plus the Wisdom Sect sparing no expense to throw spirit stones all the way, but the fastest it would take is 3 to 5 days for the Wanxian League to complete the process and issue the Golden Seal. And these 3 to 5 days of time, I have to fight for it. Lu Xian wryly smiled. So that's why you proposed to receive the Sword of Truth and asked for 3 days of preparation time? Wang Lu frankly said, in addition, if necessary, I can also suffer some serious injuries and rest for 3 to 5 days. In any case, I'm just stalling for time. So that's why you needlessly risk your life. In any case, I think Martial Uncle, you will definitely stop at the critical moment. Lu Xian clenched his teeth, thinking that he might as well let this bastard kid die. At this time, Fang He also came back to his senses. Just now, you were pestering me about whether or not I can make an exception, the definition of a cult. Is it to shut me up with words? Wang Lu nodded and admitted, although the Wanxian League's seal is a good card, it's not safe. Without Martial Uncle's promise, I don't dare to rashly reveal this card. Fang He sneered a few times, but it was more of a ridicule to himself. Good temperament, good means. After a pause, he remembered something. No wonder Fifth Junior Sister, from the beginning to the end, was unhurried and unconcerned, and even insisted on starting her own business. It seems like she has already expected this step. Wang Lu didn't deny it. 3 days ago, when he met his master in the inn, he was sure that the other party had already guessed his plan. Because the two of them had too many things in common. If it were Wang Wu, she would most likely do the same thing. It was not difficult to speculate Wang Lu's means. Wang Lu smiled and asked, then, I think there should be no problem for the two Martial Uncles, right? Fang He was silent for a long time, and then shook his head to indicate that there was no problem. Lu Xian said in a deep voice, I only have one question, this cult, how long do you want to run it? While speaking, his eyes became serious again. In theory, as a disciple of Lingjian school, even if Wang Lu was now the head of the cult, he still had to be limited by the sect's rules. And according to the sect's rules, after this experiential learning, he must return to the mountain to cultivate until he reached the King Pill realm, then he could freely leave the mountain and wander the 9 regions. But on the other hand, what if Wang Lu announced his departure from Lingjian school at this time? Then he could fly freely in the vast sea and sky. At that time, he would have millions of people under his command, his power would be monstrous, and his future would be boundless. Although for Lingjian school, he would become a dishonorable traitor, it was not to the extent that he couldn't be killed. And with the sect's consistent style, they most likely wouldn't hit Wang Lu while he was down. Therefore, the price of leaving Lingjian school was something that Wang Lu could completely afford. Therefore, Lu Xian had to ask, Wang Lu, what exactly do you want? Upon hearing this question, Wang Lu's smile became even more brilliant. Martial Uncle, I am a professional adventurer, and one of the most basic qualities is concentration. I have never forgotten the fundamental purpose of founding the Wisdom Sect, so you don't need to ask this question. 4 months later, Wang Lu returned to Spirit Sword Mountain. Chapter 126. In the chilly spring, the experiential learning of the Lingjian school finally came to an end. At this point, from all over the Blue River region, the disciples of Spirit Sword sect returned to the mountain one after another. Among them was the figure of Wang Lu. In the end, Wang Lu chose to return, leaving behind the sect that he created. To put it cruelly, he abandoned it like a pair of worn-out shoes. Wang Lu's departure was so natural and unrestrained that for a long time, Yi Chuchen, who was appointed by him to take charge of the overall situation, felt like a dream. From the initial defeated general to the current deputy sect leader, the change in his status was simply earth-shaking. And when he thought of the power and status that he had now, Yi Chuchen felt that deep in his heart, the long-extinguished fire of ambition began to burn again. Of course, this ambition was not aimed at Wang Lu. Even if Wang Lu had left, Yi Chuchen didn't dare to think that he could replace his position in the sect. In fact, as the deputy sect leader, he was nothing more than a chess piece in Wang Lu's hand. He didn't have too much autonomy. Before returning to the mountain, Wang Lu had formulated a very detailed strategic plan, which included the next 20 years of development of the Wisdom sect. In his words, in the early stage of the Wisdom sect's construction, honestly doing the planned economy was more realistic than anything else. Yi Chuchen didn't think that he could be more brilliant than Wang Lu. Therefore, as long as he strictly followed the plan, it was enough. Although as the leader, it was common sense to leave one's own mark in office, Yi Chuchen didn't have such an opportunity. Because Wang Lu still had a backup, Daoist Ming Yun. Although he didn't have the ability to replace Wang Lu as the deputy sect leader, as Wang Lu's most loyal lackey, he was the best candidate to monitor Yi Chuchen. Yi Chuchen was very clear that if he couldn't be a good chess piece for Wang Lu, there were many people who could replace him in the sect. At least, dirty old man He Yun was ambitious. In addition, the only problem that Yi Chuchen needed to worry about was the mysterious Sky Mansion. A few months ago, in order to deal with that crisis, Wang Lu made a bet with the mysterious Sky Mansion and obtained a huge investment. Although they had agreed that, within the time limit of the bet, the mysterious Sky Mansion had no right to interfere with the Wisdom sect's operation and only had a certain right to know, but if Wang Lu was gone, Yi Chuchen really didn't have the confidence to resist the infiltration of such a behemoth. With his ability and prestige, it wouldn't be surprising even if he were to be overthrown. For this reason, Yi Chuchen even specially asked Wang Lu for help before he left. Wang Lu was indeed worthy of being Wang Lu. He had already thought of this problem and left Yi Chuchen a wonderful plan. He said that if Yi Chuchen felt that his authority was shaken, he could dismantle it and act according to the plan. Yi Chuchen couldn't help but be curious. He secretly opened one and glanced at the title. It was a letter with the title, "Bombard the Headquarters." Out of caution, Yi Chuchen didn't continue reading it. He prayed that he wouldn't have to use this letter. After leaving the Wisdom sect and returning to the Spirit Sword Mountain, although in the eyes of many outsiders, Wang Lu harbored many regrets, in fact, he had already exhausted his interest and no longer had any nostalgia for the mortal world. Regarding the Wisdom sect, Wang Lu had never regarded it as a real cause. In essence, it was more of a whim. Compared to mobilizing millions of people to transform the world with a wave of his hand, Wang Lu actually liked the heartfelt joy when he explored the mystery of the immortal path on the Spirit Sword Mountain. In addition, Wang Lu had also silently severed his ties with the mortal world. The encounter in the Wang family village made Wang Lu completely lose his confidence and interest in the mortal world. With the establishment of the Wisdom sect, millions of people moved for it. Wang Lu obtained a transcendent status, but it also pulled away the distance between him and the mortal world. When he was able to face the mountain of corpses and the sea of blood in the illusion of the Sword of Truth, Wang Lu's mentality had long been separated from the mortal world. His only concern was his biological parents. On this point, Wang Lu's rationality was almost cruel. He never revealed his identity to his parents, and he didn't let them take the artificial spirit route to participate in immortal cultivation. Wang Lu was very sure that his parents didn't have the aptitude and temperament for immortal cultivation. Compared to being an immortal, they preferred to be ordinary mortals. With such a temperament, even if they had the heavenly spirit root, they still wouldn't be able to cultivate. Wang Dafu, his wife, Sui Shi, and his concubine were now ordinary wisdom sect disciples, active in the construction of the sect. With Wang Lu's secret care, their lives were more wonderful than before. When the experiential learning was about to end, Wang Lu took one last look at his parents and then turned around to leave. In this life, perhaps he would meet them several times, but after several decades, the two of them would eventually be buried, while he himself would have to work hard on the long road of immortal cultivation for hundreds of thousands of years. However, his father didn't have any regrets. Before Wang Lu left, he used elixirs to help him recuperate so that his concubine could give birth to a son for Wang Dafu, ensuring the continuity of the Wang family. Thus, Wang Lu no longer had any worries in the world of mortals. After a year of experiential learning, when the disciples returned to the sect, they felt as if a lifetime had passed. Senior brother, this year's experience is really like a dream. Standing at the entrance of the Spirit Creek town, Wen Bao couldn't help but sigh with emotion. After a year, the dead fatty's cultivation base had reached the 6th level Qi cultivating stage. In the last 4 months, he lived up to everyone's expectations and broke through to the next stage. Moreover, as a middle-level member of the Wisdom sect, he also experienced several actual combats. Thus, his primordial spirit and swordsmanship have made considerable progress. Plus, after several times of transforming into the awakening type Wen Bao, his temperament was much more mature than a year ago. Although his strength progress was not fast among the disciples in this experiential learning, overall, Wen Bao's harvest in this experiential learning was greater than the vast majority of his fellow disciples. If I can have a few more months, perhaps my cultivation base can advance another level. Wen Bao said, somewhat unsatisfied. What, haven't you played enough? I'm about to die of boredom. The response to Wen Bao's sigh was a slightly tired girl's voice. After a year at the foot of the mountain, little Ling Er has had enough of the holy maiden's life. In the first few months, she thought it was fresh and interesting. First, it was Wang Lu's wisdom sect that was fresh and interesting. However, after seeing the rapid development of the wisdom sect, she became accustomed to it. Not to mention that in the last few months, although the wisdom sect's development was fast, there was no innovation in the model. According to Wang Lu, it was nothing more than a process of accumulating quantitative change and waiting for a qualitative change. This process would take at least several decades. At that time, the wisdom sect could truly become an independent and powerful sect. This was also one of the reasons why Wang Lu left the wisdom sect in a carefree and unrestrained manner. The wisdom sect was no longer a plaything. Secondly, the holy maiden's identity was fresh and interesting. No matter where she went, she would be worshipped by people. The girl's vanity had been greatly satisfied. However, little Ling Er was not a vain girl. After being worshipped for a while, she felt impatient. When they met, they would first kowtow. When they spoke, they would first say a long string of words of admiration and joy. After that, they would then kowtow 3 times and 9 times before they were willing to leave. Little Ling Er's limited patience had long been worn out. In the last few months, whenever she saw this kind of devout believer, she couldn't wait to directly kick them. However, as the wisdom sect's holy maiden, although her words and deeds didn't need to be too rigid, she really couldn't kick a believer. Thus, she could only forcefully suppress it, like postpartum depression. In the last few months, she simply wanted to put on a show of, my family's whirlpool belle won't be this depressed. Fortunately, she finally came back. Looking at the familiar streets of the Spirit Creek town and listening to the friendly greetings of the town's acquaintances, little Ling Er experienced the unprecedented warmth of home. The Spirit Creek town is still the best. Okay, you guys go back to the mountain. I want to go back to the inn to have a good rest. Don't bother me for the next 3 days. With that, little Ling Er ran away like a wisp of smoke. 3 minutes later, at the Ru family inn. Is anyone here? 2 uninvited guests pushed the door and walked in. Behind the door, the lady boss looked at them in astonishment. The youth who took the lead put out 9 coins. 2 bowls of wine, 1 plate, plate your sister. Why are you guys here again? The lady boss was almost in grief and indignation. She had just returned home and hadn't even put down her luggage when the door was broken in. How could she continue her business? Why didn't you guys obediently go back to the mountain to report? Why did you come here to make trouble? Didn't you see the closed sign at the door? Wang Lu smiled. You don't need to remind me, I've already taken down the sign. You're welcome to open for business at any time. Besides, no matter what, you're also a disciple of the Spirit Sword Mountain. How could you forget the 1-month buffer period? The lady boss froze for a moment. She then patted her head and remembered that there was indeed such a thing. The experiential learning of the Spirit Sword Mountain was for 1 year. After 1 year, no matter where they were, they had to return to the mountain. However, there was a more than 1-month buffer period from their return to the mountain. During this 1 month, a small part of the time was spent on the road, while the majority of the time was spent on the draft. What draft? Of course, it was the summary report of the experiential learning. From the beginning, this was one of the important indicators to measure the results of the disciples' experiential learning. 1 year of experiential learning was not only to improve the disciples' cultivation, but more importantly, it was to temper and sublimate the disciples' mind and wisdom. And this part of the improvement could not be observed from the strength of the magical power or the condensation of the primordial spirit. Therefore, they simply used the form of a report to test the results. What they gained in this 1 year, what they experienced, all of them were recorded one by one. After the elders read it, they would naturally have a clear idea. A year ago, Wen Bao was worried about this, but a year later, he actually forgot about it. Hee, senior brother, this time, I have to rely on you. Wang Lu snorted. Originally, I didn't expect you to write it. When you were the head of the infrastructure department, your work report was the worst among all the department heads, even worse than that group of illiterate loose cultivators. In any case, you're from a noble family, yet you know nothing about poetry, songs, and prose. You can't even write official documents properly, and you can't even write vernacular. With this kind of conduct, you're only fit to write a novel. Wen Bao raised his eyebrows. You don't say, I'm really inspired. 2 days ago, when I was on the road, I came up with the title, Wisdom's Sex Disciple. It's a story about a peerless master with a dual personality. When he puts on the mask, he's low-key and cowardly, but once he takes off the mask, he's crazy and cool. Wang Lu looked at Wen Bao with a bit of surprise. After a long silence, he patted his shoulder. Do it well, don't be a eunuch. Huh. Chapter 127. For the next half a month, Wang Lu and Wen Bao stayed at the Ru family inn, shamelessly, and peacefully engaged in their writing work. After many unsuccessful protests from the lady boss, she was too lazy to care about them. Every day, she would cook some radishes and cabbages in plain water to feed these 2 useless literati, which could be considered as fulfilling her obligation as a teammate. In this half a month, the disciples of Lingjian School came back to the mountain from all over the Blue River region. And because the Spirit Creek town was the only transit station between the mountain and the foot of the mountain, the disciples inevitably met each other. Compared to a year ago, the disciples who came back from outside seemed to have been reborn. Most of them followed the instruction manual issued by their master to gain experiential learning, which was a rare experience, and subsequently, they quickly matured. After a year of rapid growth, the self-confidence of these disciples had also doubled. Therefore, when they met and greeted each other, it was inevitable that they would show their sharpness and some friction would arise. Of course, at the foot of the Spirit Sword Mountain, it was not to the extent of fighting, but it was inevitable that they would occasionally quarrel until their faces turned red. After all, in this past year, almost everyone had a fortuitous encounter, and the order that was originally set on the mountain had long been disrupted. This was a good time to reshuffle the cards, and everyone was somewhat dissatisfied. The Lingjian school was not the kind of sect that had a strict hierarchy, where everyone's position was clearly marked. However, each disciple would have a vague position for themselves and others. Who was stronger than them, who was weaker than them, and what kind of attitude they should have toward these people. Almost all of these were fixed. Although the Lingjian school did not advocate this, this was probably the concept that was engraved in the bones of the people of the 9 regions, and it was not easy to reverse. And in this half a month, Wang Lu watched the countless quarrels of these little brats with great interest. Of course, although they were quarrels, most of them were nothing more than bragging and shooting each other's mouths. Some said that he had defeated a high-level Foundation establishment demon from a cult last month. Some said that he had killed an inner core monster. There were also some who said that he had encountered the favor of a Shudan female cultivator, and that they had been sentimental for a while. The stories were more exciting than the previous one. Wang Lu just listened silently at the side, but Wen Bao, who was determined to write a peerlessly good book that would shock the world, scratched his ears and cheeks with joy. He repeatedly sighed that there was indeed wisdom among the people. He was just worrying about how to write those cool and domineering stories, but he didn't expect to be able to listen to them endlessly while drinking tea in the hall of the inn. Of course, apart from listening to the stories, there were also many useful gains. After a year of training, these disciples had also exchanged a lot of information with each other. For example, which senior brother or senior sister had an amazing fortuitous encounter in some place, which made them feel ashamed of their inferiority, and which junior brother had almost been trapped in an ancient tomb. Fortunately, he was blessed by the heavens and didn't die prematurely. Apart from gossip, there was also comparison. Most of these disciples were overflowing with confidence, and they were not convinced by each other. However, during the exchange of gossip, through constant comparison with each other, they also formed some consensus. That was, in the past year, there were a few people whose gains were indeed far better than the others. In short, they were superhumans. Although they were full of confidence, if they were to face those superhumans, they had no chance of winning. For example, a certain successor disciple who was rushing his manuscript in the inn was a good example. Although he looked amiable, there was nothing special about him, and he spent most of his time at his desk writing. But for some reason, as long as they got a little closer, they could feel a stagnant aura, which made them breathless, and they couldn't help but lower their heads. Fortunately, the disciples had also gained a lot of knowledge in the past year. After some discussion, they came to a conclusion: this was the legendary temperament of a leader. At the foot of the mountain, many people with high positions of power had a similar temperament, such as emperors, generals, ministers, or the heads of big sections. Therefore, people guessed that Wang Lu had run some organization by himself this year. But no one could guess that before returning to the mountain, Wang Lu already had millions of followers, and the entire grassroots level of the Great Ming country was under his control. A person with this temperament, even if his cultivation base was poor, it couldn't be much worse. Not to mention that Wang Lu had always been known as an experiential learning expert. Whether it was the immortal path or the sky-breaking journey in the small clear sky peak, it made people firmly believe that in this year's experiential learning, his harvest was absolutely not small, and it was very likely that he would break through the limit of people's imagination. Not to mention that even if there were many controversies when he entered the mountain, he was still a genuine successor disciple, so there was no need for them to look for trouble with him. However, even Wang Lu, who was recognized as a superhuman by the disciples, couldn't be ranked first. If you want to say the first, it should be the successor disciple Lu Li. This was the sentence that Wang Lu heard the most during his stay at the inn for more than half a month. As for why the woman nicknamed Little Lu Li could have such an amazing achievement, why? Because she single-handedly killed the 12 blood cloud demons in the Blood Cloud Gorge. Those 12 demons were all peak Foundation establishment and even Shudan stage characters, yet they were beaten by her, a Foundation establishment girl, until they wailed like ghosts and howled like wolves. They didn't even have the power to fight back. It is said that even the Xingjing sect was shocked by this fight. Yes, a few years ago, there was a Qianghua fairy in Xingjing sect, who claimed to be able to fight against a Shudan stage cultivator with low-level Foundation establishment cultivation. Then she proudly announced it to the world, as if she was the leader of the younger generation. But now, it seems like she's nothing special. Alas, Foundation establishment, shoot on stage, how do they fight? As the disciples discussed, they sighed. However, the nearby Wang Lu, who was quietly listening, actually thought it was funny. It's just a mere shoot on stage, what's there to shout about? My wisdom sect can casually pick out more than 10 shoot on stage elders, and when they fail to do their job and get slapped in the face by me, how many of them would dare to defect to other sects? Didn't they honestly accept it and then sigh with emotion at the grace of the ruler? The 9 regions was too vast. Even the relatively remote Blue River region was simply boundless for Qi cultivating stage and even Foundation establishment stage cultivators. There were countless cultivators in this land, and they all have different spirit root aptitude, wisdom, perception, core method, and treasures. Even if they were in the same stage, the difference in strength could be 10 times or even 100 times, which basically had no reference value. Even if they were all shoot-on stage cultivators, the Lingjian school's shoot-on stage cultivators, even the most good-for-nothing one, could easily defeat more than 10 shoot-on stage cultivators like Yi Chuchen. Not to mention others, just take a certain public official, Mu Shao, as an example. He was a standard shoot-on stage cultivator, neither strong nor weak. However, that Xianghua fairy of Xingjing sect absolutely could not contend against him with her low-level Foundation establishment stage cultivation base. Stage could not represent strength, and apart from that, there was no universal, concise standard to measure a cultivator's strength. This problem was widely discussed among the disciples of Spirit Sword sect. When the disciples quarreled with each other, they often fell into chaos. For example, last month, I defeated a high-level Foundation establishment stage beast cultivator. What qualifications do you have to be rampant in front of me? What's so great about high-level Foundation establishment stage? Junior sister Zhao Yoxin and I jointly defeated 4 high-level Foundation establishment stage cultivators, which is twice as many as you, okay? Your high-level Foundation establishment stage is not good enough, yet you still have the nerve to show off. I'm a famous beast cultivator. My side is not weak either. Even if my cultivation base is a bit superficial, my magical tool is the real deal. My side's demon tool is not weak either, but my side is 2 against 4. Nonsense, as long as our Lingjian school's yin and yang sword array is used properly, our strength is more than doubled. On the contrary, when those crooked cultivators cooperate with us, their strength is less than 10%. Your so-called 2 against 4 is actually only 2 against 5. Less than 10% your mother. Your mother. Then, there was endless biting and biting. The debate quickly escalated to personal attacks. Then, before they almost came to blows, the lady boss grabbed them by the neck and threw them out, one in each hand. When they crawled back with their faces covered in dirt, they found that Wang Lu, who was sitting in the corner, stood up. I'll say. As soon as Wang Lu spoke, the lobby of the inn quieted down. Although his ranking was not the highest in the list of superheroes, at this time and place, he was undoubtedly the most important. Moreover, his leadership aura was so intimidating that no one dared to disobey him. Don't you think you're stupid? You clearly know that it's not reliable to judge strength by cultivation base, but you still cling to it to discuss strength every time. Questioned by Wang Lu, the disciples muttered for a while. Finally, someone said in a low voice, "There's no other way." Apart from cultivation base, the other conditions are even more unreliable. Right now, there's no particularly reasonable strength evaluation standard. Wang Lu snorted. Stupid, if there's no standard, then create one yourself. What's so difficult about that? The disciples looked at each other. They only felt that Wang Lu's words were original, yet ridiculous. How do we create it? Wang Lu sighed and looked at the disciple who asked the question with disdain. Then, he walked to the center of the lobby, found a table, and took out a pen and paper. It's very simple. First, we'll set a standard value. Standard value? The disciples asked curiously as they quickly gathered around. Wang Lu nodded and explained, "First, we'll design a cultivator who's mediocre in all aspects. For example." As Wang Lu spoke, he drew a small person on the paper. The disciples asked in confusion, "Who is this?" "This is Little Ming." "Little Ming?" "Yes, Little Ming is an ordinary cultivator that can be seen everywhere in the immortal cultivation world. His cultivation base is at the 9th level of the Foundation Establishment realm, and his spiritual root is a 7th level mixed spiritual root. As a 9th level Foundation Establishment realm cultivator, he has a low-rank core cultivation method, 3 middle-rank magical tools, and more than 10 low-rank panaceas. That's about it. This kind of cultivator is probably the most common in the 9 regions, right?" The nearby disciples discussed for a while and all nodded their heads. Indeed, although compared to the disciples of the Lingjian school, he was very shabby, but the disciples who were used to the suffering of the common people had already deeply realized that shabby was the common situation in the immortal cultivation world. Little Ming looked down and out, but in fact, there were many people who were even more down and out than him. Many cultivators who were barely able to reach the Foundation Establishment realm, because their spiritual roots were too poor, their lifespan was almost up, and all of their abilities were in a period of decline. They could not be compared to the young cultivator on Wang Lu's paper. In addition, although middle-rank magical tools were not rare, having 3 was already very good, and having more than 10 low-rank panaceas was the icing on the cake. Wang Lu said, "Then, we'll set Little Ming as the standard value. In other words, a standard 9th level Foundation Establishment realm cultivator should look like this. Then, we'll set a cultivator, for example, this is Little Gang." With that, Wang Lu drew a little person, which looked 90% similar to Little Ming. Little Gang is also a mediocre cultivator that can be seen everywhere in the 9 regions. It's just that, unlike Little Ming, he is an 8th level Foundation Establishment realm cultivator. As for his cultivation method and equipment, I won't list them in detail, but the principle is the same. So, if Little Ming and Little Gang fight, basically, Little Gang's chance of winning is more than 80%. No problem, right? One by one, the disciples nodded their heads. Although they were in the same realm and only had a difference of 1 level, the other conditions were basically the same. Therefore, this 1-level difference was very fatal. Taking into account all kinds of random factors, Little Gang's chance of winning was more than 80%. Wang Lu smiled and picked up his pen to make some changes to the information on Little Ming's drawing. Then, let's assume that Little Ming doesn't have a middle-rank magical tool, but a high-rank magical tool. What do you think? The disciples were stunned by the question and immediately began to discuss it. And the result of the discussion was, "Then, the chance of winning is about 50-50. Wang Lu nodded his head. In other words, Little Ming, who has a high-rank magical tool, has the qualification to challenge those who are 1 level higher than him. Then, Wang Lu picked up his pen and added a few strokes to the 9th level Foundation Establishment realm on Little Ming's information panel. It became 9th level Foundation Establishment realm +1. After he finished writing, Wang Lu put down his pen and smiled. This is the principle. I don't need to explain the rest, right? Chapter 128. Strictly speaking, the calculation method proposed by Wang Lu was not particularly accurate. However, in the absence of a more reliable solution, this +1 method was at least concise and easy to popularize. With this +1 method, in addition to the initial design of the standard value, the later work was relatively simple. The disciples spent some time to make the character card of the object that they wanted to discuss, so the discussion became a lot more standardized and orderly. Hey, according to this, I'm probably level 4 Qi cultivating stage +9, which means I can challenge the level 4 Foundation Establishment Little Ming? No, you're wrong again. Between Qi cultivating stage and Foundation Establishment stage, the value difference is deducted by 5 points. In other words, I can only challenge level 9 Foundation Establishment stage. Only level 9 foundation establishment, really a failure. Hee, I'm not much better. Level 3 Qi cultivating stage +8, the challenge level is the same as junior brother, but my basic skill is not as solid as yours. Junior brother, your magical tool is just a bit worse. After you go back to the mountain and change your magical treasure, you won't be worse than me. I heard that senior sister Zhao is level 5 Qi cultivating stage +10. Although her level is not high, her strength is really powerful. In this experiential learning, it's rare to see someone with +10 strength. Isn't that so? The average bonus of our Spirit Sword sect disciples is +8, but senior sister Zhao can achieve +10. Her basic skill is so solid that it makes people's hair stand on end. But, to say the basic skill is solid? Just now, senior brother Yu and the others have calculated that senior sister Lu Li's challenge level is about level 9 foundation establishment +15. What the hell? That's equivalent to level 8 shoot on stage Little Ming. Moreover, he doesn't rely on magical treasure or panacea, which is already against the heaven's will. Then, what about Xingjing Sect's Qianghua? Because the information is incomplete, it's not accurate, but it's probably around +14. She's indeed a rare genius. We can't catch up to her. Speaking of this, the one who designed this challenge level system, senior brother Wang Lu. How much is his challenge level? Who knows? His experiential learning process is very mysterious. Except for his level 6 Qi cultivating stage, which is close to level 5, we don't know anything else. But since it's a successor disciple, it should be at least +10. Listening to the discussion of the many disciples, in the corner, Wang Lu, who had finished writing his report, slightly smiled. However, there was a hint of pain in his smile. Because his offensive and defensive abilities were too unbalanced, there was no way to calculate it according to the challenge level system. In terms of defensive ability alone, even a rank 9 shoot-on stage cultivator would find it difficult to break through his sword defense. His defensive value was probably more than 20. But in terms of offensive power, he wasn't much stronger than Xiao Ming, and it was even inferior to. This kind of challenge grading system was not particularly rigorous and precise, but it was easy to calculate and popularize. In practical application, there would definitely be various problems. For example, it was not easy to give a score to a cultivator who had an imbalance in offense and defense. However, Wang Lu's imbalance in offense and defense was rare. Therefore, when he heard others discussing this topic, Wang Lu just smiled and didn't care. For the current him, completing the experiential learning report was the most important thing. Unlike those fools in the lobby who only wrote a perfunctory report and then casually drank tea and chatted all day long, Wang Lu had high hopes for his report. One of the basic qualities of a professional adventurer was to know how to explore all kinds of resources. Regarding the potential value of this training report, Wang Lu was well aware of it. Not to mention other things, just the challenge level system that he designed and popularized was an important part of the report that needed to be written down. In fact, this was indeed the inspiration that Wang Lu gradually sprouted in this year's experiential learning, especially during the Wisdom Sect's expansion war. In the process of expansion, whenever the Wisdom Sect encountered an opponent, they would first evaluate the enemy's strength. At this time, the Wisdom Sect's division heads would often make the same mistake as the previous Spirit Sword Sect disciples. They always tried to measure the opponent's strength based on their cultivation level. Although they knew that this algorithm had a huge error, they didn't know how to unify it. It was at that time that Wang Lu designed this challenge level system and tested it in actual combat, and the effect was quite good. This set of algorithm would undoubtedly need to be patented. Once it was popularized on a large scale, the patent fee alone would be equivalent to opening up a spirit stones mine. Wang Lu had a deep confidence in this. Although the Wanxian League had designed a method to calculate the cultivator's strength, which was more accurate than the challenge level system, the calculation was cumbersome and complicated enough to make most people ignore it, and thus, it simply couldn't be popularized. The disciples of the Lingjian school still received quality education and comprehensive development, so they had never heard of the Wanxian League's calculation method, let alone other people. And at this time, a simple and easy-to-use algorithm was undoubtedly good to hear. To register the patent, formal written materials were needed, and this report that was submitted to the sex elder for review was a good carrier. In addition, a good quality training report could be exchanged for a lot of points and even challenge points in the sect. Just by writing, one could get a rich harvest, so why not? The most important point was that the wisdom sect storm was far from over. If there was no accident, there were still several difficulties that needed to be passed, and this training report was one of the keys to pass the tribulation. In the next few days, the disciples that gathered in the Spirit Creek town dispersed one after another, bringing their own reports back to the sect. Even Wen Bao, who had written more than 100,000 words of novel, returned to the sect with satisfaction. Wang Lu, on the other hand, was still unhurriedly polishing the text and revising the report in the Ru family inn. His calmness alone made many of his junior brothers and sisters deeply admire him. For the report in his hand, Wang Lu sincerely strived for perfection. It wasn't until the last morning before the deadline that Wang Lu finally left the inn and walked toward the sect's gate. However, as soon as he went out, he was surprised to see a familiar face. Brother Zhu Qin. Zhu Qin, who was walking on the street of the Spirit Creek town, also didn't expect to meet Wang Lu here. With a surprised look, he immediately nodded. Senior brother Wang Lu, good morning. Wang Lu asked with a smile, you just came back? Yes. His expression was obviously a bit unnatural, and he took half a step back, showing that he had no intention of approaching the other party. As if he didn't see it, Wang Lu stepped forward and patted him on the shoulder. Want to take a walk together? Zhu Qin's face was twisted, but he didn't respond. However, even though he expressed his protest with this silent posture, it still couldn't make Wang Lu back off. Are you not feeling well? Zhu Qin gritted his teeth. It's nothing. Since senior brother has invited me, let's take a walk together. In the end, Zhu Qin didn't dare to refuse Wang Lu. Because just now, when they looked at each other, he felt that Wang Lu seemed to have seen through him. This made his heart panic, but he didn't dare to have the slightest bit of carelessness. It's just a walk together. They've already arrived at the foot of the Spirit Sword Mountain, what could he do to him? This was not a place where his wisdom sect could run rampant. The two of them walked side by side on the small road of the Spirit Creek town. In the early morning, the town was shrouded in a thin layer of morning mist, which made it look very comfortable. However, Zhu Qin, who was walking among them, felt that the atmosphere was so oppressive that it was suffocating. Brother Zhu Qin, since we parted 4 months ago, we haven't seen each other again. What have you been doing since then? Zhu Qin forced a smile and said, nothing, I mainly went home to visit my family. After all, it's to sever my ties with the mortal world, so I can only spend a few months with my mortal world relatives. I don't have great ambition, unlike you, senior brother, who has lofty ambitions. Oh, visiting your family? That's good. Wang Lu nodded. His smile seemed to contain a lot of meaning. After a moment of silence, Wang Lu asked, how's the report? Zhu Qin's heart suddenly jumped. From the corner of his eyes, he saw that Wang Lu still had that faint smile on his face, as if he didn't mean anything. Just a perfunctory, I didn't pay much attention to it. Oh, what does it say specifically? I remember before we went down the mountain, the elder once said that it's best to stick to the topic of the relationship between the two worlds. You're from the royal family, so you should have your own unique perspective, right? Zhu Qin felt as if cold sweat had seeped out of his forehead, but he tried his best to keep his voice calm. Oh, how could I have a unique perspective? I'm just randomly writing. Really? Then junior brother, you've really wasted precious resources. If it were me, I would write, facing the brutal interference of the immortal cultivation sect, how should the mortal world's emperor deal with it? Boom! Zhu Qin's mind seemed to explode with thunder, causing his vision to turn black. His footsteps staggered, and he almost fell down. Wang Lu, this guy. Could it be that he could see through people's minds? How could he know that his report was exactly? That's right, although the topic of Zhu Qin's report was not as direct as what Wang Lu said, the starting point of the report was, if the immortal cultivation sect forcibly seized power, as the emperor of a country, how should he deal with it? This topic was, of course, based on his feelings, but where did his feelings come from? Of course, it was from hearing and seeing. Don't forget, the base of Wang Lu's development of the wisdom sect was precisely the great Ming country where Zhu Qin was from. 4 months ago, when Zhu Qin returned to his country, he heard the imperial spies mentioning the wisdom sect. At that time, he was taken aback. Unlike the emperor's ministers who were unaware of the crisis, even if he didn't know what was special about the wisdom sect's development model, at least, he knew that the thing that came out from Wang Lu's hand was absolutely earth-shattering. It couldn't be underestimated. Therefore, later on, he would rather be despised by his junior sister Yu and firmly reported it to the sect, hoping that the sect's elders would promptly come forward to break up the wisdom sect and resolve the crisis of the great Ming country's imperial power. Who knew that even the second and third elder couldn't suppress Wang Lu? Later on, when he learned that the wisdom sect had unexpectedly become a member of the Wanxian League, Zhu Qin almost vomited blood. Was there any King justice in this? Was there any law? Wanxian League, could you be any blacker? 2 million spirit stones to buy you. Your moral integrity is too cheap. However, at that time, the entire Great Ming country's annual protection fee to the Wanxian League was only several 100,000 spirit stones. Although there were a lot of spirit stones among the people, their mining capacity was far from being able to keep up with the demand, which made Zhu Qin unable to complain. Later on, he also wrote a report to the higher authorities of the Wanxian League, but as expected, it was like a stone thrown into the sea. Since the elders in charge of joining the sect dared to accept the money, they naturally had the confidence to suppress the report from the grassroots level. In the next 4 months, the Wisdom sect, on one hand, had the Wanxian League certification, on the other hand, they also colluded with the Mansion of Light, which immediately infiltrated the Great Ming country from top to bottom. Later on, what made him vomit blood the most was that his imperial father actually came to him and asked, "Qin heir, do you think this Wisdom sect's Golden Jade 6 Harmonies technique has a head start?" Imperial father, you must not be confused by the evil sect's words. What Golden Jade 6 Harmonies technique? It's simply a pheasant method that can be seen everywhere in the immortal cultivation world. Hey, I saw some people who practiced it had a good effect. That's because they practiced the heaven-burning blood technique and exchanged their lives for it. After explaining it to his father with great difficulty, Zhu Qin wanted to cry but had no tears. This Wisdom sect had already infiltrated the emperor's level. Later on, would this country be surnamed Zhu or Wang? Wait a minute, this statement was like putting a green hat on his father's head. In any case, Zhu Qin decided at that time that he could not allow the Wisdom sect to continue to spread and infiltrate. If the Wisdom sect was willing to go to other countries to develop, Zhu Qin didn't care. However, the Great Ming country would never allow them to dip their fingers in it. He was the crown prince of the Great Ming country, once respected by millions of people. Since he was a child, he lived in luxury from these millions of people, from the rule of the Zhu clan dynasty. Even if he cut off his mortal karma, he still couldn't cut off this karma. However, what could Zhu Qin do with his strength alone? If the opponent was Wang Lu, even if he had 10 times more courage, he still wouldn't dare to openly resist. Therefore, in desperation, he could only turn his gaze to this report. The only thing he could do was to write a report and ask the sect's elders to come forward and uphold justice. For this report, Zhu Qin had put in a lot of effort. He didn't even hesitate to delay the last few months of his precious experiential learning to summon a large number of writers in the imperial court to draft this report. The purpose of this report was naturally to oppose the Wisdom sect's interference in the mortal world. However, the report couldn't be written so directly. After all, the Wisdom sect had been certified by the Wanxian League. When the second and third elders received his report, they had already come forward to deal with it, but they were pushed back by Wang Lu. However, the current situation had obviously been tacitly approved by the two elders. Therefore, if the report was too incisive, it would be tantamount to slapping the two elders in the face. Fortunately, the writers around Zhu Qin were all experts in this field, so it didn't matter if the direct approach didn't work, they just needed to change the angle. The group of Great Ming country's bureaucrats seriously thought about it and decided to draft the report with the theme of further strengthening the immortal cultivation world's supervision and guidance of the mortal world's political power. The content was roughly divided into two levels. First, when the mortal world's emperor faced the interference of the immortal cultivation world, it would be very difficult to solve the problem with his own strength. Thus, he would inevitably need to seek help from the immortal cultivation world. Second, the content was from the immortal cultivation world's point of view. Cultivators' direct interference in the mortal world's affairs was indeed not desirable, but the immortal cultivation world, the mortal world, was not an independent body that was not connected to each other. Therefore, the immortal cultivation world should carry out supervision and management of the mortal world's political power to avoid natural and man-made disasters, which would make the common people have no way to live. At the same time, it also needed to strengthen the internal supervision of the immortal cultivation world, to prevent some cultivators or immortal cultivation sects, through the corruption within the Wanxian League, to ignore the prohibition and do whatever they want in the mortal world. The report was actually quite nondescript. The starting point was different, but the intention of writing the report was very simple, to talk about it next year, which was to hope that the sect would be able to do something about the wisdom sect's problem. Although it was not clear how the second and third elders were dealt with by Wang Lu, this report would undoubtedly give them a reason to start again. Yes, your wisdom sect is a legal sect, so we will not ban it. However, as one of the 5 uniques of the Wanxian League, my Lingjian school has the responsibility and obligation to supervise and guide your wisdom sect's management behavior. This was the strategy that Zhu Qin came up with after racking his brains. It was not particularly brilliant, but if he could directly hand the report to the Heavenly Sword Hall, Zhu Qin was confident that it would have some effect. The existence of the wisdom sect, no matter from which angle, was an eyesore. The elders would not be willing to let it go, but they lacked the excuse to make their move. It was just that. No matter how Zhu Qin calculated, he never thought that he would bump into Wang Lu in the Spirit Creek town, not to mention that his plan was one step ahead of him. What do you want? At this point, it was useless to deny it. Zhu Qin didn't think that Wang Lu was a kind-hearted person, nor did he think that he was easy to fool. Since his plan had been seen through, he could only face the consequences and wait for his punishment. However, Wang Lu unexpectedly smiled. What do I want? I didn't think of anything, it's you who thought too much. Write the report well, don't waste your unique advantage. Zhu Qin was immediately confused. Could it be that Wang Lu wanted to let him go? Although he also knew that Wang Lu wasn't a person who would seek revenge for the smallest grievance, he also wasn't kind-hearted. Or did he want him to retreat? Avoid trouble? Retreat was indeed an option. However, thinking of the report that he had painstakingly written, Zhu Qin couldn't retreat. Senior brother, I was born in the Great Ming country. Before he could finish his words, he saw a middle-aged Taoist wearing a golden robe, riding a donkey on the stone-paved road in a leisurely manner. That Taoist's appearance was ordinary, and the donkey under him was in dire straits. Not only its fur was tattered, its body was covered with scars, as if it had been cut by thousands of knives. The pair of donkey's eyes reflected the vicissitudes of life and depression. That Taoist was silent. Without even looking at Wang Lu and Zhu Qin, he directly passed by them. When his figure was about to disappear into the alley corner, that Taoist finally turned his head and looked at Wang Lu. Then, in a very low voice, he said, "Did you see that? It's the same heaven-burning blood technique, but that person is 100 times better than you." The donkey's angry and depressed neigh was particularly ear-piercing in the quiet town. Chapter 129. In the warm spring season, the Spirit Sword Mountain had once again regained its usual liveliness, despite the fact that this withered sect was not very popular in the past. However, after a year of experiential learning, without the dozens of lively chi-cultivating stage disciples, the mountain was indeed a lot more deserted. In addition to the Foundation establishment and Shudan stage disciples, there were not many people stationed at the mountain gate all year round. Not to mention the wandering elders, those King Pill stage disciples were also restless, always running around. In this 1 year, it was as if the Spirit Sword Mountain had been exterminated. Now that the newcomers had returned to the mountain with joy, the mountain finally had a bit of liveliness. After returning from the experiential learning, the sect quite humanely gave them a few days off. On one hand, it was to allow the disciples to recuperate, restore their state of mind from their experiential learning, and prepare for their future cultivation. On the other hand, it was to give the elders time to review the report, so that they could decide how to teach the disciples according to their aptitude. Reviewing the report was a very troublesome job. Even if the reviewing elders all had full Yuanying, 9-colored, and almost deity stage ability, not only could their thoughts move as fast as lightning, but they could also multitask 9 times, which was very mysterious. It was still a very taxing job to carefully read through dozens of reports. Moreover, based on these words, they had to outline the author's experience in the past year in their mind, and then carefully analyze the gains and losses. In these few days, the main reviewing elders, Lu Xian and Fang He, were simply mentally and physically exhausted. Of course, a mere dozens of reports were not enough to stump the 2 peak Yuanying stage elders. Although they were a bit busy, they were not tired. The real cause of mental exhaustion was another reason. Senior brother, forgive me for my incompetence, but I can't read this report anymore. It's better to hand it over to sect leader senior brother. If I continue to read it, I'm afraid my state of mind will be unstable. Hey, don't talk about ability or incompetence. I also feel stuffy when I read that report. It's a pity that Zhu Qin, that child's painstaking effort, could be called a fine article, but now it's like a wedding dress. After all, they have put in a lot of effort. What should be fine is fine. I didn't expect these children to write any profound truth. It's not easy for Zhu Qin to have such insight and train of thought, after all. Fang He paused and said somewhat helplessly, after all, he can't be compared with Wang Lu. At this point, Fang He didn't want to talk about it anymore, so he changed the topic. Senior brother, I don't know where Lu Li's report is, I haven't seen it yet. Lu Xian also shook his head. It's still in his master's hands. Even though junior martial brother Zhou went out to travel and asked me to teach Lu Li, she's still a disciple of the Brilliant Peak after all, and the core cultivation method is junior martial brother Zhou's brilliant sword heart. Naturally, junior martial brother Zhou saw the report first. Speaking of which, it was a bit regretful. A year ago, because junior martial brother went out to travel, he taught Lu Li for a month. He was very fond of Lu Li's childlike innocence and amazing aptitude and perception, and regarded her as his own child. He also planned to trick his junior martial brother to use Lu Li as a gambling stake at the mahjong table in the future to deceive that child to inherit the mantle. Unfortunately, the sect's successor inheritance was not a holiday gift box that could be exchanged at will. Lu Xian could only sigh that he had never met such a good material. Of course, as the sect's training elder, it was actually very difficult for him to train another successor disciple alone. If he wanted to inherit the mantle of the Misty Peak in the future, he would have to step down from his position as an elder first. As Lu Xian and Fang He were talking, they saw a sword light flashing in front of the door. The sword light was crystal clear. It was the 4th junior martial brother Zhou Ming. The 4th elder's face was 30% helpless and 70% depressed. Lu Xian was happy to see this. Could it be that Lu Li made you angry again? Zhou Ming snorted angrily. Fang He said, I wonder if junior martial brother brought Lu Li's report? It should be submitted to the sect leader tomorrow. Before that, 2nd senior martial brother and I have to review it. As a result, as soon as the words came out, Fang He felt something was wrong because the 4th junior martial brother's face suddenly became gloomy. After a long time, he heard him softly ask, "Senior Marshal brother, do you really want to see it?" At this point, Fang He certainly didn't want to see it, but Zhou Ming had already sighed and threw a report at him. Fang He curiously opened it and suddenly his vision went black. There was nothing to say, it was 100% Lu Li style. Experiential Learning Day 1, I ate barbecue today, it was delicious. Experiential Learning Day 13, I ate grilled fish today, it was delicious. Experiential Learning Day 72, I ate crab spring roll today, it was delicious. Experiential Learning Day 73, I saw a skirt today, it was very beautiful, but I have no money to buy it, and the shop owner refused to give it to me. What should I do? Experiential Learning Day 74, I ate roasted corn today, it was delicious. Experiential Learning Day 121, I didn't eat today, I'm very hungry. Experiential Learning Day 306, today, I met 12 strange people, they said they wanted me to be their human cauldron. I wanted to ask if they had anything good for me to eat, but then I remembered that Master said I must never be a human cauldron, so I had to refuse. They wanted to catch me, so I followed Master's instructions and beat them with a sword. They were very powerful, but I was more powerful. In the end, they still couldn't beat me. Later, several people were beaten until they vomited blood pills. They looked delicious, but Master said I can't eat things I don't recognize, so I had to give up. Experiential Learning Day 312, today, I ate rice cake, it was delicious. Fang He spent a while to close the report, and after a long time, he said, there is no lack of childishness. Zhou Ming was not so polite. He angrily slammed the table and said, she's already 17 or 18 years old, and has been cultivating in the mountain for more than 10 years, and she still has childishness. Before we went down the mountain, I reminded her to write the report carefully, emphasized the specific requirements no less than 10 times, and even showed her the sample. After returning to the mountain, she gave me a food diary. It's really infuriating. At this time, in order to comfort Zhou Ming, and also to vent, Lu Xian also frowned and threw a report to him. Junior brother, why don't you read this report to ease your mood? Zhou Ming took the report, closed his eyes, and finished reading it. However, he was silent for a long time, unable to speak. This report should be submitted to the sect leader, I really can't judge it. With that, he laughed again. Fortunately, it was fifth junior sister who took him in. Such a disciple, except for her, no one can teach him. 3 days later, at the top of the stellar peak, the sect leader Feng Yin Daoist master held a report in his hand, smiling bitterly. Alas, these successor disciples of the Lingjian school, one is better than the other, making people worry. This Lu Li. It's no wonder that junior brother is so angry. Although the brilliant sword heart needs a clear mind, at this point, how can she be independent in the future? But he heard a disdainful voice next to him. Humph, what does a woman need to be independent? Just find a local tyrant to take care of her, and in the future, enjoy glory, splendor, wealth, and happiness. Feng Yin turned his head. Then why don't you go look for one? The woman was very indifferent. Senior brother, please take care of me. Pay me back the money you owe me first. Feng Yin lightly blocked her, and then said, a few days ago, people from Xingjing sect came, do you know about it? The one who rode the donkey? He has some skill, but what did he come for? What else can he do? Naturally, it's because of the trouble caused by your baby disciple. The woman shrugged. Humph, the Wanxian League has already recognized him, what else can he say? Nonsense, don't you know how your disciple got recognized by the Wanxian League? If not for the sake of my Lingjian school's face, he wouldn't have given away that 2 million spirit stones. Right now, people only think that it's my Lingjian school who instigated him from behind the scenes, so they didn't make a big fuss about it. They even turned a blind eye to the heaven-burning blood technique. However, don't forget that more than a year ago, because of this heaven-burning blood technique, you made Xingjing sect lose face. Now, Lingjian school is using the same trick again. What do you want Xingjing sect to think? The woman naturally was too lazy to think about it. In short, he's looking for trouble? Feng Yin said, it's not exactly looking for trouble. After all, even if my Lingjian school insists on suppressing this matter, he has nothing to say. Xingjing sect's conduct in the central region is not any better than your disciples' wisdom sect. Although they don't have the heaven-burning blood technique, they can amass the financial resources of hundreds of millions of people, making a lot of immortal sects cultivators rich. This is an indisputable fact. And Wang Lu's wisdom sect, at least for now, doesn't have much corruption. It's an open secret that the immortal cultivation sect squeezes the mortal world, so there's nothing to blame. If he uses this matter to provoke us, not only will his Xingjing sect lose face, the entire Blue River region's Wanxian League system will be implicated, and the loss outweighs the gain. Then why do you still ask this question? Feng Yin smiled. There's always such a principle in this world, where there's oppression, there's resistance. When the immortal cultivation sect squeezes the mortal world's resistance always exists. It's just that, for thousands of years, they haven't had the ability to break this order. After all, we, the immortal cultivation sect, are better at killing people. However, the rebound from below is not only from the mortal world itself. Take a look at this report. The woman took the report from her senior brother, turned it page by page, and spent some time to read it. She then said with a smile, there's a ghostwriter. It's that child Zhu Qin. He's a country's crown prince, so it's not surprising for him to hire some scholars and ministers to ghostwrite him. The key is that the content is really interesting. The woman threw the report away. What's so interesting about it? It's just a moan of being raped. It's just a cliché, it's nothing more than another way of saying it, a bit euphemistic. Feng Yin said, the report itself is nothing special, but why don't you combine it with this one? With that, he took out a jade slip and threw it over. The woman was stunned. Wanxian League conference material? This is the proposal from the mortal world's Qin country? To strengthen the immortal cultivation world's supervision and guidance of the mortal world's political power? Interesting, it's a coincidence. Feng Yin sneered. What do you mean by coincidence? This kind of proposal is proposed in almost every conference, and every time, it would be approved by the union leader. But the result is that it's bullshit, nothing more than a routine slogan. With the precedent of Xingjing sect, no one dares to propose a thorough investigation of the immortal cultivation world's interference in the mortal world in the Wanxian League conference. Even if it's proposed, it would be useless. Only those middle-rank and low-rank small sects would be punished to death. However, in recent years, more and more people have proposed it, and eventually, the momentum has become more and more serious. Didn't you see that even our Lingjian school has encountered this kind of thing? Although Xingjing sect is like the sun in the sky, their pressure is also 100 times more than ours. The woman blinked. So, that donkey-riding Daoist came here to sympathize with us? It's not that we sympathize with each other. Kong Zhang came here as a personal visit. But after beating around the bush, it seems like he came here to ask for advice. Ask for advice? What advice? That man wanted to say something, but he didn't want to say it clearly. At first, I thought he was mentally ill. But after he left for a few days, I got this report, and then I understood what he wanted to ask. Oh, the chosen one, his reputation is well deserved. With a sigh, Feng Yin opened the report that had been read the most times. Chapter 130. At the top of the stellar peak, the silence in the bamboo room lasted for a long time before sect leader Feng Yin chuckled and asked, Junior sister, have you finished reading? The junior sister snorted and threw the report back to him. You've picked up a treasure. Feng Yin shook his head with a wry smile, but he didn't deny it, because he had indeed picked up a treasure. A few days ago, when this report appeared in his hand, even with his deity stage cultivation base, He was still stunned for a moment before he recovered. It was really a work of God. The report used hundreds of thousands of words to elaborate a huge and complex theoretical system to answer the question that had puzzled the Wanxian League for a long time. How to deal with the relationship between the immortal world and the mortal world. In short, it was to serve the people. Why should they serve the people? The answer was very simple. First of all, the power of the people was extremely powerful. This kind of power was not destructive. In terms of destructive power, it was not difficult for a deity stage cultivator to destroy a country with millions of people. Millions of people couldn't be compared to a cultivator. The difference in power could be described as heaven and earth. However, from another point of view, among millions of people, there were hundreds of organic cultivators. Among these hundreds of people, there were at least 7 or 8 people who could cultivate the king pill, and if they were lucky, there would be a Yuanying stage cultivator. Then, if a Yuanying stage cultivator had 7 or 8 king pill, plus several Shudan stage and foundation establishment cultivators, compared to a deity stage cultivator, wouldn't the gap be much smaller? Not to mention now that man-made spirit root was very popular, these millions of people were simply millions of potential cultivators. Not to mention that millions of people could continue to reproduce, turning into millions of people and billions of people. On the other hand, even if a deity stage cultivator made it every day like a stallion, how many descendants could they give birth to? Not to mention that the proportion of their descendants with spirit root was not much higher than that of mortals. If they were born, they would only be waste. Not to mention that millions of people worked for their entire life. They could produce food, cloth, steel. They could move mountains and fill the sea, shake the feng shui line, and even burn their blood to transform into a mortal. On this point, Wang Lu didn't deny it, nor was he modest. He clearly wrote the miraculous achievements of the wisdom sect in his report. A sect that was founded in the wilderness had expanded to the entire territory of the Great Ming Empire and even the surrounding countries within a short span of a year. It had absorbed nearly 10 million followers. What was even more commendable was that it had developed earlier and had a better foundation. It had already broken away from the stage where people used the heaven-burning blood technique to exchange their lives for cultivation. Instead, they had begun to exchange their labor force for spirit stones, and spirit stones for spirit roots. They had begun to purchase mid-grade and even high-grade man-made spirit roots in bulk. With a high-grade spiritual root, a stable foundation, and the support of a sect that was rolling in wealth, what was the difference between the sect that Wang Lu established on a whim and the ordinary sects of the Wanxian League? At the same time, in order to avoid being attacked as a loophole of the heaven-burning blood technique, Wang Lu gave a set of comparative data, the life expectancy curve of the wisdom sect. Although the heaven-burning blood technique was a big killer, because of the improvement of the social order, the increase in the utilization of the surrounding spiritual energy, as well as the popularization of spirit grass, in just 1 year, the life expectancy of the people didn't decrease, but increased. In just 1 year, from starting from scratch to joining the Wanxian League, the power of the people was undoubtedly demonstrated. This power was placed here, would you use it or not? Even if the Wanxian League didn't use it, there would always be someone else who would use it. Secondly, how to make good use of the power of the people. The Wanxian League had used its own example to vividly tell everyone that exploitation would not work. So what should they do? They could only serve the people. The most important factor in the rapid development of the wisdom sect was the selflessness of the sect leader. The sect's amassing of wealth was the craziest. When millions of people were searching the mountains and plains for spirit stones, Wang Lu himself didn't take a single cent. All of his business activities were to train the millions of followers of the wisdom sect. The so-called selfless service to the people was nothing more than this. In the early stage, the wisdom sect developed rapidly because there was no loss of resources. From the beginning to the end, the person with the biggest harvest was Wang Lu. Even though there was no direct income in this 1 year, in the next few decades, when the wisdom sect continued to step on the right track, the accumulated income would be endless. How to properly use the power of the people, Wang Lu gave a classic answer based on the development of the wisdom sect. Finally, from another point of view, now that the immortal world and the mortal world couldn't be separated, cultivators would always go deep into the mortal world. If you don't serve the people, do you want to prey on the people? In the early years, the common saying was that all living things are stupid, and cultivators need to guide them. Unfortunately, later on, it turned out that the ability of cultivators to guide the people was not as good as the mortal world's emperors, but their ability to prey on the people was stronger than the other. In the above exposition, Wang Lu quoted from many sources, but in total, it only accounted for 1/3 of the whole exposition. And the remaining part was the key. It was not difficult to use the people's infinite power as bait to lure them with benefits. However, a guiding ideology that could run through the entire immortal cultivation world couldn't just lure them with benefits. Otherwise, compared to long-term development, there would be more people who would kill the goose that laid the golden eggs. And the solution to this problem was to rely on ideals. Wang Lu gathered the millions of followers of the wisdom sect, using the millions of pioneers to sublimate the world's great ideals, and then proved that the spiritual atomic bomb was indeed powerful enough to change the world. Now that he had to make a proposal to the Wanxian League, Wang Lu also took out his spiritual weapon. It was still the millions of pioneers, the sublimation of the world. This time, Wang Lu actually began to seriously make this big lie. The theoretical basis of Wang Lu was that the mission and objective law of the immortal cultivation world in 9 regions was to continuously liberate the productive force and improve the overall cultivation of the immortal cultivation world. The former could be proved by a large number of historical books. Although the 9 regions had experienced the Age of Chaos, as well as the Great War of Immortals and Demons, it still continued to move forward. Even if it was in twists and turns, perhaps it couldn't be compared with the glory before the Age of Chaos, but it could be compared with the bleak Dark Age. After all, it had made too much progress, and it was constantly approaching the glory before the Age of Chaos. For thousands of years, this kind of progress had continued, and occasional setbacks could not reverse the general trend. However, Wang Lu believed that this was the eternal law that existed in the big society composed of millions of cultivators and hundreds of millions of people in the 9 regions. So, by analogy, what would it be like when this big society progressed to the extreme? In theory, everyone could ascend, and there would be true immortals everywhere. In particular, when Patriarch Lu He invented the man-made spirit root, didn't it provide everyone with the opportunity to ascend? Even if it seemed like a fantasy today, what if the productivity was increased by tens of thousands of times? The surrounding spiritual energy was not fixed. When people could transform the world and make the surrounding spiritual energy emerge by tens of thousands of times, high-rank spiritual objects and even immortal objects would emerge in an endless stream. Was there anything in this world that could stop millions of people from ascending? Therefore, for cultivators, serving the people was not to lower their status, nor was it to conspire for the benefit of the vast number of people. Instead, it was for the millions of people to ascend in the future, for the sublimation of the 9 regions. Those living beings struggled hard under the banner of wisdom sect for the millions of people to ascend. Therefore, with the higher stage and stronger power of the cultivators, why wouldn't they contribute to this great ambition? As for why it was millions instead of tens of millions, Wang Lu's explanation was that, according to his calculation, as long as there were millions of people who ascended, the 9 regions would have a qualitative leap. At that time, the surrounding spiritual energy would be so rich that it would automatically sublimate, transforming the spiritual energy into immortal energy. Then, the 9 regions would naturally become the immortal world, and the entire continent would ascend. As for the calculation process, neither Feng Yin nor Wang Wu understood it. In the last 2/3, Wang Lu spent a lot of time building models, piling up formulas, transforming everything in the world into numbers, and deriving unimaginable answers. However, he didn't understand the specific process, but there was no need to understand it. Wang Lu spent a lot of time to prove that the millions of pioneers were correct, which was a nonsense job. Even the previous enticement part was nonsense, and even the entire hundreds of thousands of words report was nonsense. However, right now, what the Wanxian League needed was a nonsense report, and Wang Lu could make it more beautiful than anyone else, making the readers want to die, unable to stop. In Feng Yin's view, this report simply had the right timing, the right place, and the right people. What was the right timing? Led by Xingjing sect, the several top-ranked sects of the Wanxian League were now facing this problem: how to deal with the relationship between the two worlds. Nowadays, the dualistic structure of the two worlds was unstable, which anyone could see. However, there was no mature way to deal with it. Was it to interfere too deeply with the mortal world? As a result, one by one, the aloof and remote cultivators were dragged into the water by the mortal world, turning into a piece of evil. Thus, there was the most commonly mentioned saying that the path of immortals and mortals were different, so they intentionally isolated the immortal cultivation world from the mortal world. However, to be like those ancient sects from the mortal world thousands of years ago, where 30 to 50 people lived in seclusion in the deep mountain and devoted themselves to painstaking cultivation, was now absolutely not feasible. Just like the Lingjian school, which was relatively isolated from the world, it belonged to the maverick minority. Any big sect must have its own foundation in the mortal world, which could form a stable structure like a pyramid. However, the four words "the path of immortals and mortals are different" actually drew a natural moat in the stable pyramid. The mortal world was forced to toss and turn at the bottom, bearing the layers of exploitation and oppression from above. At the same time, as time went by, the released rebound became more and more powerful. The contradiction of the dualistic structure of immortals and mortals was the right timing. In the immortal cultivation world, especially big sects like Xingjing sect, they urgently needed a set of theory to deal with this contradiction. What was the geographical advantage? This report came from the Lingjian school, which was the geographical advantage. Without the Lingjian school, one of the 5 uniques of the Wanxian League, no matter how extravagant Wang Lu's report was, in the end, it would not be able to win people's trust. In other words, if he didn't come from the Lingjian school, the development of the wisdom sect alone would face many insurmountable difficulties. The Lingjian school was the geographical advantage for Wang Lu. And the people? There was no need to explain it. After Wang Lu, there were tens of millions of followers, as well as dozens of times more eager to become immortals, eager to be favored by the wisdom sect. If this was not the people, then what was the people? With the right timing, geographical advantage, and the right people, it would be hard for this report not to be popular. So, what are you going to do? Regarding Wang Wu's question, Feng Yin already had an answer. This article can't be published in Wang Lu's own name. His influence is not enough, and the text also needs to be revised. In these 2 days, I will seriously revise it, add my signature, and submit it to the Wanxian League Academic Research Committee. Such a report is enough to provide thousands of academic credits and tens of thousands of academic points. Not only can it fulfill the routine quota of the committee, it's also enough to raise the academic level of the Lingjian school to the 9th rank. Chapter 131. After all, the older the ginger, the spicier. After reading the report, Feng Yin already had a plan in his heart. At this time, even the expected academic credits and academic points were almost on target. He was indeed well prepared. However, in the face of such a skillful sect leader, Senior Brother, the 5th elder of Lingjian school, just sneered. Senior Brother, are you going to blatantly plagiarize Wang Lu's academic achievement? Feng Yin gawked for a moment, and then his old face blushed. Junior sister, what nonsense are you talking about? Can you call this academic matter plagiarizing? Don't pretend to be pretentious. You self-proclaimed scholars are the most unrestrained. Let alone plagiarism, do you think there are fewer cases of prostitutes? That Xingjing sect disciple with tens of millions of fans, didn't he get caught not paying for prostitutes in Cloud region some time ago? I don't think you're any better than him. Feng Yin was filled with grief and indignation. Junior sister, you know me. I've been cultivating for many years, but I don't dare to say that I have the virtue of a sage. I've never gone whoring, and it's even more impossible for me to owe money. I'm absolutely innocent in the matter between men and women. The fifth junior sister condescendingly cast him a contemptuous look. Oh, little Ling'er can testify, right? Feng Yin immediately changed the topic. Junior sister, the value of Wang Lu's report is so great and heavy that a Qi-cultivating stage disciple of Spirit Sword sect can't suppress it. If he submitted it to the academic committee in his own name, it would be taken away by that bunch of rats, and it would be swallowed cleanly in an instant. At that time, this painstaking report would at most be exchanged for a whimsical and absurd evaluation, a dozen academic credits and a few hundred academic points, and that would be the great mercy of those academic committee members. After a few months, they would finish digesting it, and then they would publish it in their own name, without even mentioning the reference points, making it their own achievement. Don't tell me this kind of thing is new. The fifth junior sister continued to sneer. Committee member Feng's self-criticism is quite on point. Feng Yin angrily said, if I'm in cahoots with that group of rats, how could I not be able to collect the annual quota of Lingjian School? As soon as his voice fell, the old man was stunned. In front of him, Wang Wu's smile gradually became sly. It turns out that senior brother has been worrying about the academic committee's quota recently. No wonder you even want to see the results of your disciple. Feng Yin flew into a rage out of shame. What do you mean? Isn't it because you lazy bums don't care about this matter, causing me to have to write it alone? Writing it gives me a headache. What's more, I'm publishing this in the name of the sect, not for personal gain. Nonsense, you are the sect leader. Isn't the benefit of the Spirit Sword sect your benefit? You bring a bunch of rubbish articles from the academic committee every year, and no one else reads them except you. You're the one talking nonsense. It's true that no one reads that pile of rubbish, but aren't the articles that I've sorted out and categorized after reading them very popular in the Mountain Gate? You're talking nonsense. No one really reads that pile of garbage, but aren't the articles that I sorted out and classified very popular in the sect? TSK, you plagiarized so brilliantly. Senior brother, you are really worthy to be a leader. Feng Yin argued for a long time, but in the end, he couldn't argue with the thick-skinned fifth junior sister. After pondering for a long time, he suddenly smiled. Well, I'm too lazy to talk nonsense with you. Don't you just want to get some benefits for little Wang Lu? I didn't intend to blame him. With his cultivation base, he should be ready to cultivate non-phase sword qi, right? Wang Wu pondered for a moment. At least a year. His current non-phase sword bone and non-phase sword art are better than I expected. Not to mention his non-phase heart sutra and primordial spirit refining, the effect of his 1-year experiential learning is beyond expectation. Now, he only lacks magical power cultivation base, which can't be rushed. Yes, I have also heard about his cultivation base from second junior brother. Once your non-phase method helps him break the wall of void spirit root, it's reasonable for him to advance by leaps and bounds. However, this 1 year has almost consumed his previous accumulation. Next, you should seriously train him for a year to lay a good foundation. When he reaches the 5th level of Qi cultivating stage, I will open the Savage Gate for him. Wang Wu suddenly became interested. The gate to the Savage Land? You're actually willing to open the Savage Gate? Actually, it's not a question of whether I'm willing or not. It's just that I don't have full confidence, so I don't dare to open the gate for my disciple to gain experiential learning. But where do you think Yaoer went during this 1-year experiential learning? This time, even Wang Wu was stunned. Hey, you're not that cruel, are you? With Yaoer's aptitude, as long as she doesn't go to the west of the Western Mountain, there won't be any danger. 3 months ago, she was seriously injured, but she managed to cultivate a sword embryo. In any case, I've already been cruel once, so it depends on whether junior sister is willing or not. Wang Wu snorted. Nonsense, I'm not the one going, what's there to be reluctant about? On the other side, after returning to the mountain for a week, Wang Lu felt that his bones were a bit lighter. This week, the Heavenly Sword Hall elders were busy reviewing the reports. His master and the sect leader were doing some shady business at the stellar peak, so they didn't see each other all day long. Some of his junior brothers and sisters were recuperating, and some were on vacation. The mountain was filled with a leisurely atmosphere. Their cultivation had also begun to accumulate. In addition to breathing spiritual energy every day to enhance their magical power, there was nothing new about it. What was worth mentioning was that several of his junior brothers and sisters came to visit. Needless to say, when Bao Yuxinyao came once. She didn't say too many words, but she thanked Wang Lu for broadening her horizons when she was in the Great Ming country. At that time, when she was in the Great Ming country, she followed the Wisdom Sect's vice sect leader and several elders around for several days, signing a lot of documents and transcribing a lot of articles. Later on, she learned that those were some of the key materials for the Wisdom Sect's application to join the Wanxian League. She was a disciple of one of the 5 uniques of the Wanxian League, but she wasn't a member of the Wisdom Sect. Thus, as a third party, her signature on the document had considerable weight. Therefore, it was reasonable to say that she helped the Wisdom Sect, but instead, junior sister Yu thanked Wang Lu for letting her participate in such a jaw-dropping miracle feast. Even if there was no me at that time, senior brother could always find someone else. But, to be able to leave my handwriting on it, I have to thank senior brother for taking care of me. Yu Xinyao was so well behaved that Wang Lu couldn't help but marvel. Could it be that this child came to ask to be his mistress? However, Yu Xinyao only said a few words and then took her leave, without saying anything else. In addition, there was another visitor worth mentioning, which was Wang Zhong. A year ago, he followed Zhu Qin to the north. Later on, they parted ways midway, and after a year of experiential learning, his temperament had calmed down a lot. When he saw Wang Lu, he seemed to have thousands of words to say, but he didn't know where to start. He only said a word of apology, and then gave him a precious blood flower vine. When Wang Lu received the blood flower vine, his heart was also curious. This blood flower vine's rank was not too high, it was only a rank 1 spirit grass. However, low rank didn't mean that its value was not high. The spiritual qi contained in the blood flower vine itself was not much, but it was one of the essential best quality materials for refining elixirs. Its real value was comparable to immortal grass, but its growth environment was too strange. Even on the clear sky peak, it couldn't grow there, so Wang Lu didn't know where he found it. Wang Zhong's visit probably meant a lot to Wang Lu himself. However, after Wang Lu received the blood flower vine, he immediately threw this matter to the back of his mind. After all, in the past, Wang Zhong was only his errand boy and not his mistress. The friendship between the two was not that deep. When Wang Zhong betrayed him, Wang Lu didn't care too much about it. Thus, whether he repents or not, it didn't matter much. In addition to Yu Xinyao and Wang Zhong, the last visitor worth mentioning was the Western gourmet Aya from the Misty Peak. Aya had lived in the 9 regions for more than 1 or 2 years. She had seen a lot of people and made a lot of friends. There was no difference whether she met or not. However, in the past year, with Wang Lu's departure from the mountain, Aya indeed felt somewhat uncomfortable. The food in the cafeteria that could not be sold had obviously become even more unsaleable. Only then did she realize how important Wang Lu was to her and the cafeteria that she managed. At this time, this important old customer had returned to the mountain, so she deliberately brought a new dish to visit him. As a result, she was almost thrown out by Wang Lu on the spot. After dealing with these trivial matters, a week passed by leisurely. 1 week later, Wang Wu returned from the stellar peak, which opened a new chapter for Wang Lu's cultivation. The teaching style of Non-Phase Peak had always been unique. After the master saw her disciple, she sized him up and then sighed. "Tell me, what do you want to learn?" Wang Lu thought for a moment and said, "Brilliant Sword Heart." Wang Wu immediately became unhappy. "What the hell is this Brilliant Sword Heart? Why do you want to learn it?" Wang Lu said with a smile, "I heard that senior sister Luli of Brilliant Peak, with this Brilliant Sword Heart, is very cool and domineering, so my heart yearns to learn it." In the previous week, when he chatted with his fellow disciples on the mountain, he learned a bit more about the legend of the successor disciple Lu Li, and also had a clearer understanding of Brilliant Sword Heart. The principle of the so-called Brilliant Sword Heart was to use a special primordial spirit cultivation method to drive the entire cultivation system, so that the cultivator's primordial spirit, magical power, body, and even magical treasure would eventually reach the state of Brilliant Sword Heart. What was Brilliant Sword Heart? This was a mysterious and indescribable concept. However, objectively speaking, it was the sharpness of the sword chi, which was unstoppable. Once the flying sword flew out, it could go straight to the opponent's vital point. One thrust and one thrust, the other thrust, making the front and back illuminated. This was the Brilliant Sword Heart. In the Blood Cloud Gorge, Lu Li beheaded the 12 demons. At that time, she had just entered the foundation establishment stage. Relying on the powerful internal and external unity of power, her first sword strike pierced through the opponent's 3 strongest Shudan. After that, she fully displayed the 15 layers of fiery sword art. Each sword strike could pierce through the heart of one of the Blood Cloud Gorge's old demons, and the wound ignited with inextinguishable fiery sword. Eventually, the Blood Cloud Gorge turned into a sea of fire, and the bones of the 12 evil old demons did not remain. According to Wang Lu's challenge level calculation, Lu Li was actually just an 8th level Shudan, so it would not be difficult for her to win against any one of these 12 demons. After all, not only those 12 demons didn't increase their level, but because of their low level of method and other factors, they were reduced by 1 or 2 levels. However, 1 against 10, moreover, she won almost without any loss, which was appalling. The key was that Lu Li's Brilliant Sword Heart was too powerful. Her sword momentum was so sharp that it could be said to be invincible. Once she gained the upper hand, the opponent would be caught off guard and would likely collapse. Then, she would behead them one after another, which would eventually lead to an astonishing record of 1 against 12. However, Lu Li had just cultivated the first layer of Brilliant Sword Heart. At that time, Wang Lu thought, my non-phase sword art is number 1 in defense. If coupled with this invincible offensive Brilliant Sword Heart, then it would be a tyrannical and cool dual cultivation of magic and martial arts, which would be a proper match for my main character template. Therefore, when he opened his mouth, he immediately used Brilliant Sword Heart. As a result, his master silently stared at him for a long time. She only said a few words, which immediately dispelled Wang Lu's desire for Brilliant Sword Heart. If you practice that thing too much, it will reduce your IQ. Chapter 132. Will practicing Brilliant Sword Heart reduce your IQ? Although he felt that Wang Wu wasn't speaking without thinking, this matter was indeed a bit strange. Then, what if senior sister Lu Li is in a fight and her IQ is not enough? Does she carry brain platinum with her? Moreover, fourth uncle seems to have a good IQ, he doesn't have a runny nose nor drool. Could it be that his Brilliant Sword Heart cultivation is insufficient? To these questions, Wang Wu's explanation was that Brilliant Sword Heart was not a demonic method that damaged the brain, but rather a special refinement of the primordial spirit, which would affect a person's way of thinking. Lu Li was not a natural moron. In fact, if she was asked to calculate, she could easily get the answer to the astronomical number of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. However, cultivating Brilliant Sword Heart made her mind too pure, like a young lady who was ignorant of worldly affairs. Moreover, there was no possibility of improvement. In this past year, all the disciples of Spirit Sword sect had matured a lot. Only Lu Li was still giggling like a child. In fact, this was mostly because of Lu Li's nature. Her aptitude in cultivating Brilliant Sword Heart could be called unprecedented, far stronger than her master Zhou Ming. Although the fourth elder also cultivated Brilliant Sword Heart, his early years' encounter made his mind never clear and flawless. This admittedly made it impossible for him to cultivate to the highest level of Brilliant Sword Heart. However, at least he didn't have to be a moron, which could be considered as a blessing in disguise. As for you, I can see that your mind is full of changes, so you're actually not a good material for cultivating brilliant sword heart. However, if you really want to practice, I can teach you. Perhaps you'll be able to attack and defend at the same time, but you might also become mentally ill. What's your choice? Wang Lu thought for a moment. In his heart, he really yearned for the mental state. However, if he could become a crazy, cool, and arrogant mental state, then that's fine. However, if he could become like Lu Li, who wrote her experiential learning report as a food diary, then he'd better not. Since ancient times, there was an old saying, only a miser can become a local tyrant. And Wang Lu was undoubtedly an extremely miser, in terms of IQ. Although in many people's eyes, this guy's brain was already very abnormal, so it didn't matter if his IQ was wasted, but Wang Lu refused to take a step back. Alright, if you don't want to learn brilliant sword heart, what do you want to learn? Wang Lu replied with understanding, the improved version of brilliant sword heart, the kind that doesn't deduct IQ. Wang Wu looked at her disciple deeply. Disciple, you are so quick-witted. Why don't you finish your apprenticeship? Finished my apprenticeship? Tossing aside the idle chatter, the master and disciple quickly got to the main topic. Do you have any thoughts about this year? In terms of cultivation. Wang Lu thought for a moment. Non-phase method is indeed very cool. In the past year, he managed his sect to flourish, and in the most critical initial stage, his non-phase method played a pivotal role. Especially in the several battles where he incorporated the 7 Stars sect, Wang Lu displayed the defensive power of his non-phase method to the extreme, thus creating a miraculous result. But it's too inconvenient. Hearing Wang Lu's complaints, the master smiled instead. Tell me, what's inconvenient about it? Let's not talk about passively taking a beating. Even from the defensive point of view, it's also very inconvenient to be left with a lone commander. This was also the conclusion that Wang Lu, as the leader of the Wisdom sect, had experienced hundreds of battles. Non-phase method's defense was number 1. Therefore, on the battlefield, even if he was being concentrated fire, Wang Lu could still protect himself. However, later on, when this problem was discovered, the other side often left Wang Lu to kill his men. No matter how powerful Wang Lu's non-phase method was, it couldn't protect the lives of others. In the expansion war, he had lost a lot of his men. Hee, you're in love. Wang Lu almost spurted out blood. You, woman, really have deep cleavage but shallow brain. Your brain is in the wrong place. How can you see that I'm in love? His master was a bit surprised. You're already 15 years old. A normal teenager at this time should have gone berserk. Could it be that this year, you've taken some kind of medicine with high content of heavy metal and lost your ability? Wang Lu slapped the table. Whether I have the ability or not, you can come and try it yourself. Hee, you don't even let go of your master, yet you still say you're not in love. Fine, I'm in love. What are you going to do? However, he saw his master's complexion turn slightly serious. That's good, it proves that you still have 7 emotions and 6 desires, still have a heart that cares about others, and have not cultivated into a piece of rotten wood and stubborn stone. Nowadays, there are always some fools who think that the immortal cultivation world is a long road to walk alone. They cultivate to the point that their humanity has been obliterated, but they still boast that they are unsentimental. Compared to them, I think your millions of ascenders are more interesting. Wang Lu smiled. Master, are you interested in joining the sect? His master ignored him and continued to explain, non-phase method is the world's #1 life-saving method. Not only can it save your own life, it can also save other people's lives. This is also natural. Otherwise, if you pretend to be a tortoise and get beaten to your heart's content, your wife and daughter would be kidnapped and humiliated in front of you. What's the point of living? Wang Lu said with a smile, being cuckolded is worse than death. So, what does master want to teach me? Wang Wu pointed her finger at the teacup on the table. Smash it. Wang Lu's sword of Mount Kun moved like lightning, fiercely stabbing the teacup. However, the moment the tip of the sword touched the teacup, it was blocked by an invisible force. The recoil force made Wang Lu's right arm issue a terrifying cracking sound. The bones in his arm were actually broken. And his master, from the beginning to the end, never left her seat, at least 3 or 4 meters away from the teacup. What is this? Wang Lu withdrew the sword of Mount Kun with his left hand and, regardless of the serious injury on his right hand, curiously looked at the teacup. Innate non-phase sword chi. I know the name is not good, but if you have the time to think about the name, you might as well improve this method. As you can see, there's nothing special about it. In essence, it's just the release of non-phase sword chi, extending the defense to the outside of the body. It's somewhat similar to the 3 feet sword defense in the non-phase sword art, but the range is longer. Wang Lu frowned and thought for a moment, and then asked, "Master, can you take care of this small space in this room?" His master nodded her head and gestured to Wang Lu to try it at will. Wang Lu didn't use the sword of Mount Kun to test it, but directly took out a handful of thunderbolt seeds and scattered them. As a result, these thunderbolt seeds were detonated in midair. The explosive flame and shock wave were suppressed by the non-phase sword chi, and after a moment, they were extinguished. From the beginning to the end, his master had been sitting at the table with his legs crossed. There were no signs of him circulating his energy, and he didn't even take out his bamboo sword. He was just sitting there, but his sword aura was able to cover the entire room, forming a seemingly omnipotent domain. This is really interesting. Okay, I'll learn this. Wang Lu was very satisfied. Then he saw his master crossed her legs and lightly said, "You want to learn, but unfortunately, you can't. Your foundation is too poor. Sword chi, at least you have to have chi to release. You're now in the 6th level of chi cultivating stage, far from being able to release sword chi. You're not even qualified to practice sword chi. Therefore, in the next year, you have to seriously practice. At least, push your magical power to the 5th level of chi cultivating stage." 5th level of chi cultivating stage. Okay. Spring passed and autumn came. Another year passed. In the 4th year since Wang Lu entered the mountain, he finally advanced to the 5th level of chi cultivating stage, opening the door to the next stage of cultivation. The 5th level of chi cultivating stage was in the middle of the 9 stages of chi cultivating stage. In itself, it was nothing, nor did it have any special significance. If not for the Lingjian school's special requirement for its disciples to have a solid foundation, many sects that pursued the speed of cultivation would simply let their disciples pass these 9 stages in a few years and concentrate on building their foundation. However, Wang Lu, who cultivated the non-phase method, knew that for him, the 5th level of chi cultivating stage meant that the framework of the non-phase method has been completed and could be fully spread out. The non-phase method was different from the others. This feeling was most obvious when he went down the mountain for experiential learning. Because in that year, he came into contact with too many cultivation methods and met too many chi cultivating stage cultivators. And through their situation, Wang Lu was able to find out that he was different. The non-phase method taught by his master was very special. The first 5 stages of chi cultivating stage were all about laying the foundation, and the purpose was very clear. If it was described as building a house, then for an ordinary cultivator, the 9 stages of chi cultivating stage were nothing more than digging the foundation, preparing the wood, and then building the house. Finally, a big palace was built, which was the cultivator's jade mansion, the key to building the foundation in the future. As for the cultivator's spell, heart sutra, and other contents, it was like building a small house inside the palace. The palace was a cultivator's core cultivation method. Within this framework, the cultivator had a certain degree of autonomy. They could build the house bigger or smaller. It was nothing more than the position of the partition wall and the internal decoration. However, the non-phase method did not have such a high degree of freedom. From the beginning, the internal structure of the palace was fixed. Therefore, his master's previous claim that he could teach the brilliant sword heart was pure nonsense. The framework of the non-phase method was not compatible with other cultivation methods. The closed system was like a prison. Unfortunately, at present, Wang Lu's attainment in the immortal method was still far from being able to break out of the prison. At the same time, after his cultivation reached the 5th level, Wang Lu was able to see the basic framework of the non-phase method through the inner vision method. Non-phase sword bone, non-phase immortal heart, non-phase sword art, these were the core contents of the non-phase method system, and they also occupied the largest space. In addition, there were several large blank spaces in this framework, which he didn't know what would be stored in the future. As for the non-phase sword chi that he currently wanted to cultivate, it only occupied a very small space. That being the case, when Wang Lu was thinking that he would probably be able to cultivate the non-phase sword chi in 1 or 2 months, he received a summons from his master to go to the Spirit Pool Peak's pink house. At that time, Wang Lu was simply flattered. He was only at the 5th level of chi cultivating stage. There was no heavenly vision nor any new record. Was his master going to invite him to the pink house to watch a erotic dance performance? However, when he arrived at the Spirit Pool Peak's pink house, he saw his master mysteriously standing at the door. Little Lu, come here. Little Lu. Wang Lu felt cold all over his body. He immediately took 2 steps back and took out his sword of Mount Kuan. Which evildoer is pretending to be the 5th elder? Who knew that as soon as he took a step back, his master's smile became even more brilliant. Silly bird, I knew you were going to take a step back. The next moment, Wang Lu only felt his vision blurred, as if he had fallen into a long tunnel, and at the entrance of the tunnel was that cheap person's smile. I wish you a pleasant trip to the Savage. You're tuning into the Biao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.